I'm the chairman of the land use property committee, and I want to make notice that this meeting is being streamed live, public record. Recording of the meeting will be available at www.ncwildlife.org. So with that stated, let's call Margot to run a roll call.
Good morning. I'm going to do a roll call for land acquisition and property committee members. Committee chair, Tom Berry.
Yes.
Committee vice chair, Brad Stanback.
Here.
Jim Ruffin.
Here.
Ray Clifton. Kelly Davis. Here. Dana Zimmer. And ex officio members, Lonnie Cross.
Here.
Mark Craig.
Here.
Mr. Chairman, you have a forum.
Good, thank you.
I will, Mr. Chair, before you go, I will tell you, we have several members who were planning to be here today. Two of them have come down with the flu. They couldn't come in the last minute. And we have another, Tommy is recovering from a hip surgery. So we have three that just pretty much excuse absence, but unexpected in the last minute. Let y'all know that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Next item here is call on our land and water access chief, Derek Barnes, to go over some rule changes, game land rule changes, proposals. Derek.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, today is when we bring forth to you our 2026-2027 annual rule cycle proposals. This is the start of that rule cycle. And so we're bringing these proposals to our committee today in preparation for them bringing them to the rules committee in April. Today, we've got 8 proposals we'll go through with you that we're proposing. Our first one is on Butner Falls, the Noose Game Land. It's related to mountain biking. So we have a mountain biking trail, a designated mountain biking trail there on that game land. And we allow them to use that trail during certain parts of the year. So this proposal will change that time period so it will not interfere with the newly adopted wild turkey season framework. So we basically are moving the period of time that they can ride their bicycles on the trail by a day. So instead of it ending on the 15th of May, it will be the 16th of May. And then it will go from September 1st through, only on Sundays from September the 1st through May 14th versus the 15th. So we're switching it a day so that we don't overlap with turkey season. Questions on that one?
Okay.
All right. Our second one is related to camping in general across all of our game lands. This again is a rule change to match the wild turkey season framework changes that have occurred. So because we shifted those back, there's potential that our campgrounds would have been closed if we hadn't changed this rule. So we're modifying the rule to have the campgrounds open through May 31st, which would cover all of the turkey season. Questions or comments on that? All right, moving on. Our third proposal addresses the use of weapons on game lands. So currently, the rules say that we have a restriction of 150 yards from any residence located on or adjacent to the game lands that you cannot discharge a weapon in. And so this rule would allow the use of archery equipment within that 150 yards. So right now it restricts all weapons. And what we're seeing on some of our game lands is as we see more houses up next to the boundary of our game lands, that's starting to eat away at our game land usage. Basically can't hunt some of those smaller tracks or portions of tracks because of that 150 yards. So this proposal would allow archery equipment to be used in that 150 yards, but would still restrict firearms. So no firearms or muzzle loaders could be used. It would just allow archery equipment. Yes, sir.
Did the bow hunters ask for that, or did it come up from staff?
Come up from staff. Yeah. Any further questions? Yes, sir.
Just it doesn't have as much to do with what we're doing here, which I think is a good idea. But you can discharge a rifle, say, within outside of 150 yards of a dwelling.
Yes.
Good move. Next.
Okay, moving on. So this rule proposal would remove the Chowan Game Land from the Game Land program and add it to the Chowan Swamp Game Land. So Chowan Game Land is a very small 32-acre parcel that kind of sits out by itself. And it's actually about 11 miles from the Chowan Swamp Game Land. And so, you know, versus kind of regulating it by itself, and we want to add it to Chowan Swamp. We've also had a problem with big game reporting because the two are so closely associated in name that people will report erroneously to the Chowan Game Land when they're probably hunting Chowan Swamp, because it's only a 32-acre parcel. So this is more of a cleanup rule of trying to combine that small acreage parcel to a bigger game land and treat it all as one. Now, it does change some things. So Chowan Game Land was a 7-day per week area, and the Chowan Swamp Game Land is just a 6-day per week area. So they will lose a day. But it would make our management and records keeping a lot cleaner. Questions or problems?
Good.
All right. Moving to our next one, where it gets more interesting. So this proposal is on PD River Game Land. It's a proposal to prohibit dog, deer, and bear hunting on all of PD River Game Land. Now, up to this point, dog, bear, and deer hunting has already been restricted on the Diggs Tract, which is south of 74. And I got a picture here to help us understand. I hope you can see that. But down there at the bottom, the hashed green tract is the Diggs Tract, where this is already restricted. And so this proposal will restrict dog, bear, and deer hunting across the rest of PD River. And PD River, even though it's got some acreage in it, it's a very narrow, long tracks. So we're having a lot of problems with the dog deer hunting that's going on down there right now, since those tracks are so skinny, and how they're treating it. And it's actually, this game land is also split in half between the southeastern season and the central season, I think, because the season switches on that county line. So we've had a lot of problems up to this point with those, basically running dogs on these small, skinny tracks.
Sheriff, this is a proposal, obviously, and the next one I've been involved with bringing to the commission. This is something we've been dealing with for 3 years. We don't have time to go into everything that's been involved and all the problems there, and chaos for the last 3 years. When we first took this piece of property, these are the properties we got through the settlement with Alcoa and Duke Energy, where we ended up with these tract lands, and obviously for the reasons that you see there, they didn't want. So we ended up with them. And that's why we stopped at Deer Hunter Golf south of 74. And, you know, we discussed doing it at that time north of 74, but it has not worked out. And with this proposal and the next one, you can see, obviously it's going to be slightly controversial in that area. I've already talked to Kyle, we've already, this and legislators are involved in this too. And so a lot of reasons, because of the number of numerous complaints they're getting, and you'll see the next map. And Kyle and I, we're going to pull a page out of David Paul's book, and we're going to try to meet with some of the clubs, or we are going to meet with the club and see if there's other proposals like a permanent hunting system.
He's still alive.
Pardon?
But he's still alive. I hope you guys can make it back.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we are. I mean, so that's the issue behind that, and we're looking at alternative proposals, and we're going to meet with them. So hopefully, after we take public comments, get back with something, we've got something that we can all get at least be close to.
The caveat here is that you're gonna north of 70, if I'm reading this correctly, and I just scanned it, is that it's gonna be by permit only.
That's potential option. We're going to discuss, you know, we're going to start out with just prohibition. Then we're going to meet with some of these clubs and see what we think will work, what can be done.
So do we approve these? Do we need to not approve? This?
No, I think we go with what the
Dates
proposal
in
is.
here about permit only.
Yeah. No, that you got a different one.
I got the right.
That's an alternative. That's an old version.
Yeah.
So we decided just to go with the prohibition on dog run right out of the gate.
Okay, so this rule changes, just need to take it out.
With the, see there now on the table.
Yeah, but the one that I have.
That's one we're gonna discuss when we have our meetings.
Yeah, the proposal right now is to prohibit across all the game land.
You mentioned, legislative involvement.
Yes, sir. They
got a
got a multitude of complaints.
Against the dog. Yeah,
Yes.
same thing.
One of them got out and rode around on Saturdays, calling me, and telling me all the things that were going on and where our options. Well, I mean, I witnessed about 30 minutes telling me the problems we had.
Okay, further questions, comments? All right, excuse me. So moving on to our second dog deer hunting proposal, which is on the Sand Hills Game Lands. And in this case is a little different. Basically here, what we're trying to do is restrict deer hunting with dogs to designated areas of Sand Hills Game Land. And I'll show you a map. And these areas will be posted on the ground with signs that will say that these are the dog hunting areas. Essentially, we have three, what we call Block A at the top, Block B, and Block C. So these are portions of the game lands that we would then designate for dog deer hunting. The rest of the game land would not, we would prohibit dog deer hunting. Because a lot of the problems or concerns that we have in this area happen on these outlying pieces of the game lands, especially up in the north, I guess the northwest corner up there. We have a lot of that. So these would be boundaries that we would set up on the game lands with signage. We'd have a new sign that we put out to designate as dog deer hunting areas.
You still have 32,000 acres of land to deer.
That's correct.
Under this proposal.
That's correct.
And
And you can see the acreage is there.
The whole thing, and you can see, Steve, all the out parcels.
I'm in agreement.
The little bitty things there where they
Yeah.
can, and that's what's causing all the problem.
And I will say that
It's constantly run over every year. And it's just, and honestly, our law enforcement, the last 3 years, they brought 6 or 7 officers working in details, and we go through all that stuff. And they have one of the largest undercover operations we've had with whitetail deer hunting, and none of it has worked. And, this is not something hasty. This is not something we're just jumping out or not proposing. It's with their significant justification. Back it up, but they still gonna have 32,000 acres, but just, it's where they can release their dog.
And I will say it will follow the same structure, hunting structure. So it's just, we would designate those areas that they can hunt, but they would follow the same rules they've always followed.
So those.
Or the seasons, I should say.
Allowed dog running are not gonna be marked, no dog running, it's just those. that
Just
are-
those 3 areas there, comprise 32,000 acres.
Okay, further questions, comments?
Right.
All right. Our next proposal comes to us from Duke Energy on Mayo Lake. Essentially, Duke is requesting us to prohibit in our rules the construction of private piers, docks, moorings, or similar facilities or structures on the property enrolled in our game lands program. So what they're finding on Mayo Lake is you can't have a permanent structure on Mayo Lake because the Duke Energy owns the border of the whole lake, but the adjacent homeowners are coming in and putting in these moored piers or docks. And a lot of times they're like old registered pontoon boats that they're sticking out there and permanently mooring and using that as a dock. So they're asking us to put this rule in place so that we can take action against those type of illegal moorings. And they're illegal so when Mayo Lake was given to Duke Energy from the Corps of Engineers, that was part of their original agreement was that they couldn't have any of these moorings on the lake, anything moored on the lake. So they're trying to adhere to their agreement with the Army Corps of Engineers.
So I don't want to mix the neighbor that's saying any, but how is enforcement gonna work? They gonna come in there and pull those pontoon boats out till they know?
So it would, excuse me, it'd probably be a combined effort. I mean, the Duke Energy knows that that this has been a problem for a while. And so they would put out a notice to all of those people who are putting moorings, who have these moored boats out there, and then ask them to be removed. And then as we move forward in time, yeah, we would start being able to cite for those moored structures.
Okay, that brings a lot of questions. We're good.
And our last proposal is on Buxton Woods game land related to horseback riding. So this is at the request of the North Carolina Coastal Reserve, who manages, well, the North Carolina Coastal Reserve and the National Estuarine Research Reserve that manage Buxton Woods and own it. And so what we have here is that they do have a horseback trail, the Piney Ridge Trail, but currently the rules do not restrict you from riding horseback. I mean, horses on areas other than the trail, and that's what they want to do. They want to restrict riding horses on other parts of Buxton Woods, but keep horseback riding on Piney Ridge Trail, the designated trail. Questions, concerns with that? All right, then I'll turn it over to Ben.
All this comes up again in April.
This will go to the Rules Committee in April to be reviewed by the Rules Committee in April.
Thank you. Let's see here, we're gonna move on to Ben's part of the program here. Land and Water Assistant Chief Ben Solomon. We've got one phase one land acquisition and we have two drawn the back. Yeah, two. So anyway, Ben, you're up.
Yes, sir. Good morning. We have 3 phase ones to look at today. We'll start off in the Piedmont. Our first tract is the Shut Tract. This is in Richmond County. It's a 123 acre tract. It would be in addition to the northwest corner of Sandhills Game Land. The tax value of the tract is $271,000, and the approximate asking price is $368,000. It's important to mention this is a partnership project with the Nature Conservancy. So as I mentioned, the tract is located in the northwest portion of Sandhills. Access will be through adjacent game land. The tract is primarily comprised of longleaf pine and hardwood flats along the drains. And the tract does protect about 3,400 feet of Rocky Fork Branch, which is a tributary of Naked Creek. Both are outstanding resource waters, which are hard to come by in this area of the southern Piedmont. And the tract will also provide additional foraging habitat for our red cockaded woodpecker clusters that exist on this area of Sandhills Game Land. And staff would like to recommend phase one approval of the Shut Tract. Any questions?
Just to go back, has this already been applied through Land and Water, or is this part of the process? It goes to TNC and then they're gonna apply for it.
We will apply this cycle and the deadline is March 1st. So we're
You will, or they
correct.
will?
We will apply.
All right, thanks. Good project. We didn't see any.
Tom, I have a question. Is that divided into 6 or 7 parcels? The triangle at the lower right.
The triangle will be an in-holding.
Okay.
Yep, so it's the 6 in red. It's kind of hard to tell what's in red and what's not there. Any other questions on this one? All right. We'll move forward to the Painter Tract. The Painter Tract is in Caswell County. It would be in addition to R. Wayne Bailey, Caswell Game Land. The tax value of the tract is just over 2.6 million, and it's important to mention that tax value seems on the higher side, but Caswell County did recently have a tax reassessment last year. The approximate asking price is not known at this time, but we have conveyed to the landowner our limitations to pay appraised value. Important to mention, this is a partnership project as well with Piedmont Land Conservancy. The tract has excellent access. It has a lot of frontage along Ridgeville Road. It's also around 440 acres of upland hardwood and a few scattered pine stands. It's very unique in that it has 194 acres of open ag land that is currently in production through an ag lease. And it's very unique in that nowhere else on Caswell Game Land has this amount of open ag field. So this will create some really unique opportunities for some dove hunts, as well as some potential field waterfowl hunts. Also important to mention, this is a NC Natural Heritage exceptional area, and it's the Frogsboro Flats. And the existing property, or sorry, there's some existing infrastructure on the property, which includes an old homestead, some sheds, a couple old ag barns, and equipment sheds. And currently, we're working to assess those buildings. We think there's a potential to use that dwelling as a staff housing for our Caswell Depot crew. So between phase 1 and phase 2, of course, that's something we would iron out and have pinned down prior to bringing this forward for phase 2 approval. Are there any questions? Staff would like to pursue this tract, and we recommend phase 1 approval.
Yeah, let's talk about this a second. Interestingly, if you look at your map, all the open area, the 194 acres, if you'll notice and explain to me, is that the white line that proceeds from north to south on the east border is part of this project that we're talking about. Brad made note of the small square or rectangle down at the bottom southwest corner right there. I forget where we said we were going to do, but we're going to check access and see if they've got deeded access, etc.
Correct.
To try to acquire that if we approve this.
Correct. If it's available, we'd like to.
Yeah, all right. Quickly, let's go over this. We don't have an asking price yet. It'll come in as the owner agreed to at appraised value. They're going to agree to sell it at that.
They understand that is our limitation to only offer appraised value. So we're waiting on the appraisal to come in now.
Okay.
Yep.
When it does come down, what do you foresee our funding sources for that?
So this will be another land and water fund application this cycle that we would submit in WRC's name. We would submit that March 1st, and we would also work with Piedmont Land Conservancy to hopefully find some private funds. And we would also likely use some PR Pittman Robertson funds to match that land and water fund grant.
I'm in at $3 million. This is not a small project.
Correct. Yes, sir.
Okay, well, let's keep our involvement financially down as much as possible. Okay, I don't have any.
Randy, still have a question?
No, I'm addressed it already about the
Yeah.
lower
Okay.
rainwater.
All right. This is our final phase 1 to look at today. We're in Transylvania County. This is a 800-acre property. It would be in addition to U.S. Forest Service owned Pisgah game land. And this is a partnership project with the Land Trust Open Space Institute. We've recently done some work with them in Robeson County on Big Swamp, or what will soon be Big Swamp game land. The tax value of this tract is just over $1.4 million. And we have the asking price listed as not available. However, we do know the asking price is in the ballpark of 10 million. I'd like to note that Open Space Institute is taking lead on this project. They're working on developing a funding plan. There is currently no ask for funding to WRC. So I think it's important to note that this project needs some time to develop. It's very new, even for Open Space Institute. Big price tag, but we're not quite sure what our ask would be at this time. Access to the tract is from Sutton Creek Road. And there is some significant infrastructure on the tract, which includes 2 modern houses, an older cabin, a barn, a shop, 2 gazebos. And there's also an extensive hiking trail network and logging roads that would allow for good administrative use when prescribed fire XYZ management practice. There is a pond on the property as well. And while we're talking about infrastructure, I'll mention that we did have a site visit last week. We went out, looked at these houses, looked at this infrastructure. We feel that there's potential for some of these houses to serve as staff housing. That is merely a concept at this point. We know there there is some need from other divisions for staff housing in this part of Transylvania County. However, it still needs some vetting. We still need to massage that out. It will likely have another site visit or two to really pin that down and see if that's going to be a good fit. So switching back over to the resource value of the tract. The tract does entail the upper drainage of Sutton Creek, which does house some wild brook trout populations and potentially some eastern hellbender. And the tract does conserve about 6.7 miles of stream buffer riparian habitat. And staff are really excited about this one. It's important to note that it's just across the road from our Mills River Depot. So we would have a crew located very proximate to this tract. We're excited about the management potential on this tract as well. Happy to answer any questions.
We had a lot of discussion on this, and I don't know, Brad, you want to point out some of those things we discussed?
Well, I've heard one of the houses was referred to as a lodge, fairly substantial. And I think a rough estimate of the value of the houses and other infrastructure is something like 2 million, which is a big chunk of the 10 million asking price. And the largest house is up in what's the cleared area near the north of the tract, a long way from the entrance. So if that were carved off, whoever ended up with that would need an easement a long way through our game land. So that doesn't seem like a good option either. But I guess the main question is whether we can really make use of the houses infrastructure that's on there.
Is it currently for sale?
Yes, sir. It is. It's not listed on the open market, but Open Space Institute is working with the landowner and they're a willing seller.
Tom and Brett, I've been out a couple of meetings. Tell me what we're talking about when you say staff housing.
That's a good question. So we had that discussion and.
Just give me the brief.
Yeah, okay, well,
That
we do have staff that do inhabit some of the homes that we have on our properties. Not that many, but I asked that question because what is this, free housing? Who's gonna maintain this $2 million dwelling? You know, all the above. So I'm gonna let you answer that, the way that you answered for us.
So I think we do have staff housing spread across the state. One great example is our hatcheries. Our hatcheries have staff housing provided to hatchery staff that have to be there 24/7. But we also provide staff housing to our land and water access crews in certain areas where we inherited a house. So we've been able to offer that. Oftentimes, an area like Transylvania County, the housing market is pretty tough for any new hire to come in and rent a property or purchase a property. So when we've inherited situations like this that have some good infrastructure, we've been able to take advantage of that and allow other division staff to live in those houses and maintain those houses.
Thank you, Ben.
Yes, sir.
Commissioner, to follow up on that, I had the same question you did. We did a visit on Mountain last year. Talking about staff housing and, you know, who comes up here and works and provides and does all that. And they're having to come from Lenore, Morganton, all the way up there and spending a day back traveling. So if you do have an opportunity for staff housing in some of these areas, they're not having to travel as far and they can be on site and handle stuff a whole lot quicker. When you go to some of these remote areas, you get a clear picture of how that plays in and then, like you said, the local market. I had the same question you did.
So oftentimes we try to avoid inheriting or purchasing infrastructure like this, but at times in certain areas of the state, it can definitely be an asset.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Thank you, Ben.
Yes, sir.
So are you good, Steve?
Yes, sir.
The other part of this that neutralizes some of that concern, even though looking after expenses would be significant, is the OSI funding formula here. And it appears that we've got funding. Is that stretching it a little bit, or where's OSI?
Sorry, I didn't hear you there. on the OSI funding.
Funding source for this project, and I understand it's the entire project. Is that correct?
Correct. They're taking lead on developing a funding plan for acquisition of this tract.
So how much of this are we gonna have to, participate in to help them accomplish this goal?
That's unknown at this point. That's unknown at this point. It'd be premature for me to say. But they are pursuing quite a few different funding sources, including a land and water fund application, I believe, this cycle. So they're very aggressive in there.
Be signing up for $8 million until we know pretty much what our take is gonna be, or what our responsibilities.
Yes, sir. So between phase one and phase two, we'll have that picture, the funding picture defined. And if this project were to make it to the phase two level, we would have all of those details. And at that point, we would know the,
Have a lot more conversation about it. With not significant outside funding.
Yeah.
House, $2 million, as we discussed the other day, you can look at it and say, well, just about any house up in the mountains is probably worth $1 million. And, especially in a location like this, so, and I think this, idea of having staff, you, in our meeting, stated that they're coming from, significant distances to work in that area now, the game land guys, et cetera, and this would be a big game. So with all that said, the pre-meeting, we felt like this is something we ought to go ahead with. That sum it up, Brad, Jim?
I agree.
Okay.
so with no more discussion on the Stone Morris tract, that was our final phase one for today. So Mr. Chairman, if you would like, we can group all three phase ones together and take a vote to move those forward.
So, well, I'll make a motion that we move forward with all the phase ones that are as presented.
Second,
Any discussion of, or,
a little bit. On that track, then
Sir.
hopefully it's gonna be great. How would in-holding get access once those properties were to be purchased by us?
What is the in-holdings access after
Yeah.
we purchase the shut tract? I don't have that answer today.
That's that. Also.
Yeah.
Know who that is and how willing what their future plans for that property is. Same question that we had on the other track.
Mhm. Yes, sir. We'll work with,
Understand what that access fee has to be once we purchase that, because I think state law would allow us to landlock anybody.
yes, sir. Yeah, we'll look into that. And since TNC took the lead on the shut project, we'll consult with them and work with them to see if that tract is potentially available. See what we can do with that in holding.
The access is key, and I
Yes,
just
sir.
make sure that was to be addressed in phase one. Because and as we know, if we go to phase one, we don't have to go to phase two with it. So, we have options at phase one that we don't have at phase two.
Yes, sir.
thank you, Commissioner. Any more discussion? All in favor, committee? You guys got to vote, I think. Right? Yeah. Okay, they're in. Okay, all right, so let's see here, what's next?
We can move forward to our phase twos. We have two phase two projects to present today. The first is in Haywood County. This is a 98-acre tract that is not too far down the road from our existing Balsam Depot. And this would be a site for relocating our Balsam Depot to a safer area for staff to get in and out with large equipment. And there's also just a need to replenish that infrastructure. So the site is located about 14 miles from that existing depot. The tract can be accessed from Ransom Road as well as Chambers Mountain Road, so really good access, not pulling out onto a major highway like our current situation. The site suitability analysis was conducted by Gary Gardner staff. And we looked at the potential and feasibility for on-site septic and well water. And the results of that study came back and indicated that we would have no issues in developing site septic or in digging a well to provide water to the staff there at the depot. The size of the tract would also allow for any future development needs for that depot. And I know we mentioned when we took this to phase one, that the tract being a little larger we would have some opportunities for some tier 3 disabled sportsman permit hunts. And we still feel very strongly there's a lot of potential to add some tier 3 permit hunts to our Southern Mountain region, which currently does not have any disabled sportsman tier 3 permit hunts. The numbers on this property, it appraised at $926,800. And we're proposing to purchase with state funds at $926,800. And the estimated stewardship is $4,000 for boundary establishment and gate installation. And there's no estimated revenue in the 5-year period after purchase. And staff would like to recommend phase 2 approval of the Ransom Road tract. Any questions?
Just 2 seconds. Yeah, we heartburn over this last time because it was 1.5 million. And we have looked at it at this new number with renewed interest. And the fact that you can, I think we sold it on the fact that we're gonna have some handicap hunts here. Anyway, but I think as we've looked at it again and with that adjustment in price, pretty significant. And we about everything up in the mountains, about $10,000, I think. We don't have any objections, and I would encourage us to move forward also.
All right. No other questions. We'll move forward to the Bell tract. This is at the coast in Pender County. This is an in-holding at Holly Shelter Game Land that was created by the acquisition of the Sleepy Creek tract that we recently closed on in the fall of 2024. So awesome to see this in-holding being pursued and to see that added to Game Land in such short time. This is a partnership project with the Friends of the Mountains to Sea Trail. They plan to purchase the tract and then donate it to NCWRC. And the tax value of the tract is $66,504. Access to the tract will be administrative access only through a deeded right-of-way off of US Highway 17. And the tract is primarily comprised of longleaf pine in the uplands and Poquoson communities in the lowland areas. And the tract will also provide obvious benefits in our prescribed burning operations and will also promote some connectivity. This will be a donation again from Friends of the Mountains to Sea Trail. And there is no estimated stewardship or revenue because there is no boundary to establish and no boundary to remove since we're absorbing this tract. And staff would like to recommend phase 2 approval of this donation. Any questions?
Would be in favor, but I want to ask, is any other discussion? Anybody have any issues? Okay, let's move forward.
That's our final phase 2 for today. Mr. Chairman, with your permission, I think we could take a lump vote for these 2 phase 2s and move them forward to the commission meeting tomorrow.
So we need to have a motion. Probably needs to come from somebody other than the chairman.
I move. Second.
Discussion. All in favor? Okay.
All right, we'll move forward to our final 2 matters today. We have 2 easement requests. The first is at Sandhills Game Land. This likely looks familiar. We brought this to the board in our December meeting, and it was tabled at the December meeting, and we have some more information that we'd like to present to you. The private landowner that's requesting this easement would like to have ingress, egress, and utility rights through this easement. The easement path is that black dotted line that is currently their main access to their residence. It's a gravel driveway that is currently maintained by the family. And we would like to propose granting that private landowner an express easement. And that express easement would memorialize and acknowledge that private landowner's historical use of that right of way. And by granting this express easement, it does put us in a position to outline the terms and conditions of that easement, which could include, but not limited to, easement dimensions, limiting access via this easement to one residence only. And we could also outline maintenance responsibilities. It's important to note that any costs for the survey and surveying off this easement path as well as any recording costs would be on the landowner and not on the commission. And one final point, when a private landowner does have historical easement rights, like we feel exist in this situation, the state typically does not charge for that easement. So by granting them an express easement, memorializing their access, we would like to propose not charging the family for that easement. I'm happy to answer any questions.
We had a great discussion. We ended up with staff recommendation. Proper, being a good neighbor and having restrictions of one resident, et cetera, et cetera. Probably would be going to court if we didn't do something like this, and we still may be based on our discussions. So, let me call for a motion of approval. Second discussion. All in favor? Good. Thank you, Dean.
Thank you, sir. We'll move forward to our final easement request. This is at Shaco Creek Game Land. And this will be Exhibit D2 in your commission package tomorrow. This easement is for an NCDOT bridge replacement project. They will have two easements in this request. One is a permanent right of way to accommodate the new bridge that's going in place. And that will be an area of 0.457 acres. And they will also request a temporary construction easement, which is in an area of 0.513 acres. The value of this easement would be determined by a state property office if approved today and tomorrow by the commission. And we'd like to answer any questions y'all may have.
We discussed it, they're gonna get it anyway, we need to be, again, a good neighbor, and, the road needs to happen, we need to support DOT, they're one of our finest partners. So, call for motion.
So move.
Second. Favor, discussion, all in favor? Good. Good.
Mr. Chairman, that concludes our land matters for today, and you got a place on the agenda for any additional topics.
Okay, just quickly, we did discuss, two great projects that are in process. One of them is the Turkey Ridge project, both of them are on the Cane River. And we were working with another 400 acres right there that will make that a 1,600 acre tract, and, working with the, conservation fund and Sweeney. It's a big deal. The other one, is the Hickory Nut of McDowell County. This will be 3,000 acres, and it comes as a sale, but at a significant discount. And we're working toward the financing on that. So those are really, we've got some other projects, but, these are the ones that we discussed, and we're pretty excited about those. Look forward to moving forward on that. In summary, it's about 1 now 1,500 acres that we discussed today and approved to proceed with. Again, pretty cool. So with that said, land use committee is closing down.
Okay, Chairman Stone's not here to start the next meeting, so let's take a brief break until 10 o'clock. And at 10 o'clock, Chairman's not showed up. I'll ask the Vice Chairman to convene the.
Right now. Well, you want to.
Committee meeting in order. This meeting is being streamed live and recorded as a public record. Recording of the meeting will be available at www.houstonwildlife.gov. Margo, you do a roll call.
Yes, sir. I'm gonna do a roll call for Fisheries Committee members. Chair John Stone.
Here.
Committee Vice Chair Steve Wyndham.
Here.
Tommy Fumble. Brad Standback.
Here.
Hayden Rogers. Mike Alford.
Here.
And ex-officio members, Monty Croft.
Here.
Art Craig.
Here.
Mr. Chairman, you.
Margo. I'd like to call on Christian Waters to go over the 26-27 fishing rule proposals.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning. We have 13 proposals that we want to bring forth for your consideration for the 26-27 annual rule cycle. And as explained in the previous committee, these will come back in April to the Rules Committee, assuming y'all are accepting of the concepts. So the first two deal with public mountain trout waters, specifically impoundments that are designated as hatchery supported trout waters. And there is a no close season during the month of March. At this time, the NCAC puts the restriction on them that they need to be hydropower production or municipal water supplies. And there are several sites that are not hydropower production or municipal water supplies that would benefit from having this exception. And so the first proposal simply removes that language from the NCAC, and instead we will simply have a list of the impoundments to which the no close season on hatchery supported trout waters impoundments applies. The second proposal deals specifically with the Cullowhee Dam impoundment. It is an impoundment that at one time had the exception because it was a water supply. It no longer is a water supply, but if we make the previous change, we would add this to the list in order to allow anglers the opportunity to fish for other species during the no close season. So the next several proposals are all trout related to boundaries. The first one would designate waters located on South Mountains Game Land in Burke and McDowell counties as public mountain trout waters and classify them as wild trout waters. The other counties in that game land are already designated in this manner, and wild trout populations do occur on the waters within the counties of Burke and McDowell on the South Mountains Game Land. The next proposal would reclassify 1/10 of a mile of the Rich Branch in Buncombe County from hatchery supported trout waters to wild trout waters. And this is a situation where the bulk of Rich Branch is on game land, and there is a population of wild rainbow trout. And so therefore, it would default to wild trout waters. And this 1/10 of a mile is just the little bit of the creek that extends beyond the game land boundary. The next proposal would reclassify 1.1 miles of Corner Rock Creek in Buncombe County, located on Pisgah Game Land, from hatchery supported trout waters to wild trout waters. And then would remove 130 yards of Corner Rock Creek downstream of the game land boundary. And this is a situation again where there is a wild rainbow trout population. It would be more appropriate to manage it as wild trout waters. The portion on the game lands would default automatically by removing the hatchery supported designation. And then, like I said, there's a little bit just beyond the hatchery boundary that would then convert to non-designated. The next proposal would modify the boundary on several creeks that are currently hatchery supported. And that would be Bent Creek in Buncombe County, Cane Creek in Buncombe County, Stone Creek also in Buncombe County, West Buffalo Creek in Graham County, Shut-in Creek in Madison County, and Spillhorn Creek in Madison County. And in these cases, when they were first designated, they were terms like headwater, or they just referenced the entire stream, were used. And so there are portions of these streams that were never really available to public angling and were never stopped. And so this is making the boundaries match where we actually are managing them as hatchery supported trout waters. And the ultimate rule proposal would have specific boundary language for each of these. The next one would modify the upper boundary of hatchery supported trout waters on the Swannanoa River in Buncombe County. The new reach will be from the Riverwalk Park in Black Mountain to the Wood Avenue Bridge at the intersection of NC 81 and US 74A in Asheville. the area upstream of Riverwalk Park, again, has never been stocked and is not currently accessible to angling. And so we're simply removing that part to make the current boundaries meet what's actually being managed as hatchery-supported trout waters. And that is our trout proposals. Unless there are any questions about trout proposals, I'll move on to the other species. So our first, I guess, non-trout proposal is for largemouth bass, and this would remove the daily creel limit and establish that no more than 5 fish greater than 14 inches may be possessed in largemouth bass or for largemouth bass in Lake Camac in Alamance County. And this is simply a situation where the population continues to show signs of being stunted, and harvest should help that situation. The next proposal applies to spotted bass in the Allegheny portion of the New River downstream of Fields Dam. This portion of the river is co-managed with Virginia, and Virginia has recently made changes, and so we are looking to match what they've done. This would remove the daily creel limit, protective slot limit of 14 to 22 inches, and the possession restriction of fish greater than 22 inches for spotted bass. And so basically it would be consistent with our current regulations across the state for spotted bass, and Virginia has done a very similar rule change for spotted bass in their state. The next proposal applies to white bass. It would remove the minimum size limit of 14 inches for white bass. The creel limit of 10 fish per day would be retained. Again, this was put in place in 2017 to improve white bass populations, particularly the size structure and age structure. And we're not seeing that has improved anything, and a 14-inch white bass is somewhat hard to come by. So we believe maintaining the current daily creel limit will be sufficient to protect the populations. And then we have a proposal for sea trout. Now, I'll be speaking in a minute about a different issue with sea trout, but this one is a planned change, if you will, based on the fisheries management plan that is under consideration for adoption by Marine Fisheries. And so based on the fisheries management plan, it would recommend that in the inland fishing waters and the joint fishing waters for hook and line only, we establish a no possession limit, slot limit of 20 to 26 inches, and reduce the daily creel limit from 4 fish per person to 3 fish, with only 1 fish greater than 26 inches. And the minimum size limit of 14 inches will be retained. So this would be consistent with what is being proposed for coastal waters, and as well as for joint waters other than hook and line. And then we have in addition to our spawning areas rule, this would prohibit fishing from March 1 through May 31st in the recently constructed Kings Bridge floodplain slough. It's connected to the French Broad River, 0.6 miles downstream of NC 91 there in Henderson County. And our final proposal would add golden mussels to the prohibited species list, which would make it unlawful to transport, purchase, possess, sell, or stock in the public or private waters of North Carolina. Golden mussels have been found in California. They've spread quite rapidly, and they would be similar in nature to zebra mussels. So this is just another effort to try to keep that type of animal out of our state. And that's all the rule proposals we have for 26, 27. Be glad to take any questions.
Any questions? Christian, does this require a formal vote by the committee?
No, sir, just want to make sure y'all didn't have any questions or concerns or issues. We'll bring this back to rules and then it'll go through the rules process after that.
Drive on.
Okay. All right. Well, it's my pleasure to introduce Seth Miko. Seth Miko is our District 5 fisheries biologist. He's been with us since 2017. He started in District 5 as the biologist 1 and then promoted to district biologist. So he's very familiar with District 5. So if you got questions about District 5, I'm sure he'd be glad to talk to you about it. On top of that, he's also a very avid largemouth bass fisherman. So he would be good to talk to about that as well. Seth?
All right, thanks for that introduction, Christian. Like he said, I'm Seth Miko. I'm in charge of the North Central Piedmont, all the reservoirs and lakes. There's sport fisheries there in the North Central Piedmont. So today I'd like to talk to you about some of the hidden gems for largemouth bass, specifically in the Piedmont region, North Carolina. We have a lot of municipal lakes. They're mainly centered around urban centers within the state. There's small, comparatively speaking, to other reservoirs in the state. They're anywhere from 250 to 3,000 acres, most of which being less than 1,500 acres. Most, if not all of these are owned by either a local municipality or a water supply co-op, where 2 or 3 different municipalities in that area will get together and fund a reservoir to be built. And then the unique thing about these, comparatively speaking to some other reservoirs, is they all have undeveloped shorelines to maintain water quality buffers. So there are no docks, no homes or anything like that on these smaller reservoirs. The other unique thing compared to our other public reservoirs is they all have a pretty well-staffed facility. The park staff will usually staff and maintain a facility there. They have great boat ramps, ample amount of bank fishing opportunities, fishing piers, fish feeders. We have also partnered with these municipalities to, design and implement docks and PFAs and things like that. So great access for our anglers, both boat fishermen and bank fishermen as well. One of the drawbacks or limitations to them is they do have limited operating hours. They do have gates that they lock when the marina is not open. They have watercraft, like either a maximum length limit or a horsepower, outboard motor horsepower restriction. And they have varying fees and, either a day use fee or a annual permit fee to be able to access these reservoirs. So just to orient yourself within North Carolina, most of these are in the urban centers of the Piedmont, anywhere from Raleigh all the way to Greensboro, Kernersville, Winston-Salem. They're all near some of our larger reservoirs, are usually on tributaries upstream of our larger reservoirs, but still, remaining close to those urban centers. And today we're going to zoom in on 3 of these, which are awesome largemouth bass fisheries. One being Grand Mebane Lake, which is in Alamance County, just north of the city of Graham. Oak Hollow, which is in High Point, just west of the city of High Point, and then Tom Alex, which is in Lexington. And it's a lake that is owned by Thomasville and Lexington. So they all have various fisheries and great fisheries. Largemouth bass are, some of the best fisheries in the state are in these municipal lakes. And there's often low fishing pressure on the largemouth bass in these lakes. So compared to Jordan Lake or other lakes in the state, there's a little less fishing pressure for largemouth. Crappie don't do so well in these reservoirs. They tend to stun out. These reservoirs are usually high productive systems and have a lot of crappie in them, so the crappie will stun out real easy. But within the crappie lakes, where you get the stunted crappie, they don't compete with sunfish as well. So you get, balanced sunfish populations in those reservoirs. Lots of catfish, and then we stock Bodie bass where the summer habitat is conducive for them, where we get cool enough water in the summer. These are just some photos that we've taken in the field. You can see we've got some of them that have some historical populations of striped bass that have held on for years. We've discontinued a lot of the striped bass stocking in these smaller reservoirs, but there are some stripers still remaining. The sunfish are balanced and robust. The catfish are great. And then, of course, great big largemouth. So the first one we're gonna talk about today is Tomolex. It's a 650 acre reservoir and it's operated by Thomasville and Lexington. And the largemouth bass size structure there is very great. Lots of big bass there, lots of fish in that 14 to 18 inch size range, which is what a lot of anglers are fishing for. The mean weight of a fish greater than 14 inches is 3.2 pounds there. So a very, very robust quality fishery there for largemouth. And in the previous survey, over 7% of largemouth captured were over 5 pounds in that survey. Grand Mebane Lake in Alamance County, it's about 700 acres. It's operated by the city of Graham, and the park staff there at City of Graham maintain that facility and the access area. It's a very great bass lake. I can speak to personal experience here. I've caught a few of them. The mean weight of a 14 inch or greater fish there is 3.3 pounds, and over 10% of our previous survey was over 5 pounds in that lake. And then Ocala, it's 800 acre lake right outside of High Point. More of an urban lake, you know, driving to this lake, you'd feel like you were, you know, driving in the middle of a city through a bunch of red lights, and then you just T-bone into a reservoir. So it's really close to the city of High Point. And it's got a very great bass fishery. It's not as good as the previous two. Only our fish that are greater than 14 inches there are 2.7 pounds. And only 2.7% of the fishery there was over 5 pounds. So it's more of your normal city lake when it comes to largemouth bass, whereas the other two are very, very exceptionally great largemouth fisheries. So what are the benefits of these you know, very great largemouth size structures and these fisheries that we have in these small lakes? The less fishing pressure that I mentioned earlier. There's, you know, generally less anglers targeting bass at these reservoirs. The recreational boating traffic in the summer is way less. So if an angler wants to fish and not have ski boats and jet skis running by, then these are great options for our anglers in the summertime. And excellent because of the water quality buffers and no developed shorelines. They have excellent littoral habitat. So there's fallen trees and natural rock that hasn't been removed or dredged out, and just natural habitat along the shoreline. And we've actually partnered with some of these cities to do habitat enhancement projects. So we've partnered with the city of High Point and NC Bass Nation to do like a fishing trail there, which is basically predetermined spots that the Bass Nation Conservation Director has selected as, you know, spots to teach an angler how to fish for bass. And you can get a pamphlet at the marina and go run around to those spots that he selected and put fish attractors at. And we're adding native plants at a lot of these lakes, where we're working with the municipality to bring in natural native plants from our greenhouse in Mebane and plant these throughout the reservoir and get a native plant population established. And where we're allowed to, we'll do cut and cable trees, where we'll go along, usually find a tree that's dead or dying along the bank, and we'll fall it into the lake as more fish habitat. So just to conclude all this, municipal lakes support excellent largemouth bass fishing opportunities. They're close to our population centers in the Piedmont. So if you live in one of the major cities in the Piedmont, you're probably not far from good bass fishing. Access and operation rules vary, but they all provide, you know, additional public access outside of our large public reservoirs. So these are great small reservoirs for anglers, especially beginner anglers, to be close to home and go target some largemouth. And these have been great partnerships for both our habitat work as well as any sort of fish research work we have going on. So it's a great partnership between state and municipal governments. So I guess that's all I have, and I'll take any questions. Thank you.
Curiosity question, on these municipal lakes and whatever else, are commercial guides out there, you know, guiding people, and do we charge them anything for the use of this place as a commercial guide?
I bet guides aren't using these small reservoirs as much. And we don't have any sort of additional guide fee.
Okay, thank you.
But I imagine most of the guides are going to, larger public reservoirs like Blues Creek and Jordan.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Seth? Great presentation. What's the biggest largemouth you've ever caught?
Personal boat or work boat?
Either.
We're not,
9.7 out of Reedsville. Yeah, 9.7, 9 pound, 7 ounce.
See you after the meeting.
Okay.
like you got bigger with electro fishing or something, is that what you're thinking?
Oh, yeah, we've seen some of the fish that we've seen get away from the field are 10 plus probably, just couldn't get a net on them, but pretty big bass.
No other questions for Seth? Kristen, you're up again. Thanks, Seth.
Okay, I mentioned earlier that we'd have sea trout come back, and as many of y'all have probably heard, the Division of Marine Fisheries has issued a proclamation that closes the season in their jurisdiction because of cold stun. Just read this: commercial and recreational spotted sea trout fishery in coastal and joint fishing waters will be closed due to cold stun events in accordance with the North Carolina Spotted Sea Trout Fisheries Management Plan. Spotted sea trout fishery will open June 15th, 2025 by proclamation unless the reopening date is modified by adoption of Amendment 1 to the NC Spotted Sea Trout Fisheries Management Plan. So just to give you a little background on really what is a cold stun, and this information is consistent with what is presented in the FMP, but it really deals with the sea trout's cold tolerance. They begin to lose equilibrium when they get down to 2 to 4 degrees C, which that's about 35 degrees to 39 degrees Fahrenheit. So when you have these cold weather events, in particular, when you have snowfall like we had and the snow melt, it can change the water temperature fairly quickly, and that can result in, like I said, the loss of equilibrium, ultimately potentially mortality. And some of the work that was done through NC State showed that with lethal temperatures related to length of time of exposure, if you're at 3 degrees C, which is about 37 degrees Fahrenheit for 2 days, you're going to see 100% mortality. If you're at 5 days at 5 degrees C, it's 7%. For 10 days, it goes up to 85%. But if it's 7 degrees for 10 days, it's only 17%. So there's variability there, and it's not 100% mortality generally because these fish can find refuge here or there, but it definitely does result in mortality. So from that standpoint, the FMP talks about population impacts from a cold stun. And so certainly mortality, it can reduce stock size and that annual cohort strength as those spawners are, may die in the cold stun. It's hard to quantify the severity of a cold stun event because, again, those fish are moving around, and they may be just a few hundred yards downstream and find a refuge that's a degree warmer, and that's the difference. The fisheries management plan states that eliminating or reducing the harvest after a cold stun event protects the remaining standing stock biomass. So basically fish that survive, trying to give them protection to be able to spawn in that given year. So where does that leave us? Marine Fisheries definitely has done proclamation. Their proclamation is based on the FMP, which their commission approved. And so they're set. But that proclamation doesn't apply to inland waters or joint waters if you're fishing by hook and line, or at a minimum, at least it conflicts with the rule we have on the books. And so there's been a lot of questions, several commissioners, but also the public, are asked, what can we do? What are we gonna do? And several options we've been asked about several options, so I wanted to lay those out for you, here. So, the question is, could you use emergency powers? Kind of like it was done with CWD. And the answer there would be no, because it's very specific that it's to respond to wildlife disease that threatens wildlife or the public. And cold stun is not that. Emergency rulemaking is to address a serious or unforeseen threat to the public health or safety. Once again, this fish kill is not a public health or safety issue. We do not have proclamation authority. The proclamation authority we do have is specific to coastal striped bass, and it's only for opening and closing the harvest season. We do have authority, and I'll talk about this a little more, but we could use temporary rulemaking. It would not be effective until May 1st, because we'd have to go through the rulemaking process, but that is certainly an option. Permanent rulemaking is always an option, but the timing of it would be such that by the time it was in place, the Marine Fisheries Proclamation would have ended and the season would be reopened. And then, of course, always the option of no action, which would mean harvest would remain open in inland fishing waters and joint fishing waters when taken by hook and line. So to summarize, of all those potential options, there's really two choices that you have here. One would be temporary rulemaking. And if you decide to do temporary rulemaking, then we would bring a temporary rule tomorrow that would close the season until June 15th. And we would then notice that. We would have a 15-day public comment period. We collect public comment and then bring it back to you in April for you to decide whether or not you wanted to proceed with it based on the public comment that you had received.
April to put something into place.
Yes, because you have to follow the rulemaking process, it would be May 1 before it could be effective. Because you have to go through the whole process of public comment or public input, and then y'all would have to vote on it, and then it would still have to go through Rules Review Commission. They would have to vote on it, and it would have to be put in place.
May 1 to June 15th.
And then it would be, yes, and then we would close it May 1 through June 15th.
Biological step, fish still in the waters in that period of time.
Yeah, that was a great question. You're thinking one step ahead of me. So right now, unfortunately, many of the fish are in inland waters right now because they have moved up in the creeks, and that's where folks are targeting them. So they're in those joint waters and inland waters right now. By the time you get around to May, those fish have started to move back out. And so, are there some fish in inland waters, but the vast majority of them are gone by that point.
Other than just affecting a small amount of the fish, it's more wind address than it is biological.
Yes, sir. I don't know that. Yeah, I don't know that this temporary rule would have a significant impact on a biological impact. But it's the only option. And the one thing about the temporary rule is, we've been hearing from the public pros and cons. The temporary rule, does give you the option to hear formally from the public as to what their interests are in terms of closing the season. Yes, sir.
Just the optics. I've seen quite a few dead fish around the noose around New Bern just floating. I just took a picture of one. I showed these guys. It's out there. The extent of the kill, I don't know, but I'm seeing it with my own eyes. So.
Yeah, we've seen quite a few photos, it's a combination. It was really cold there for multiple days, so we were likely to have a cold stun. And again, cold stun is not a new thing. I mean, it's been happening for hundreds of years. But this year just happens to be a year where we had a really longer cold snap than what we've had recently. And then again, the snow, I mean, when you get 6 to 8 inches down the coast and then that snow melts. But those are the two options. And so I guess that's what I would ask of the committee is do we want to pursue temporary rulemaking? And if so, we'll be prepared for tomorrow, or again, the other option would be no action.
Instead of no action, could have just put out a press release acknowledging that we don't have the authority to do much here other than to encourage people from fishing for sea trout during this time. And
Absolutely. And I would say that messaging, we would pursue that regardless of what action y'all take, trying to explain where we are. To date, we've explained why we haven't been able to do anything immediate. But we were waiting until today to figure out exactly what the ultimate message was, which is, either exactly like you said, or it would essentially be exactly what you said, but we are going to try to pursue temporary rulemaking.
Jim, did you have your hand up?
Did, and first off, did it what Brad said, I think that's probably gonna be the biggest bang for our buck at this stage.
Sure.
But I'm also wondering if we were to put a rule into place May 1, I understand it would have minimal, but possibly some effect on the trout population, but minimal, it's not huge. But what's the con to not doing the con to not, or the con to doing the rule? If we do the rule, and who's being hurt by that, or we're not hurting anything other than just eliminating from May 1 to June 15th the ability to harvest sea trout. I mean, is there a downside to that, although it's minimal effect?
Yeah, I think that's the end result. It is minimal effect. It is a cumbersome process for minimal return, but that is the option we have before us, and certainly we can pursue without real issue.
I would suggest that we not do that.
Yeah.
I would just be clear to reality of the situation.
Yeah.
From a
Yeah.
biological.
That's what I was
The best thing to do is probably pursue temporary rulemaking. I wouldn't say and not do it. I just wanted to be clear about, how effective.
Yeah, it seems to me like
It's
it's a cumbersome process with minimal effect versus her efforts into getting the word out. That this is the situation we have now. I think the response anglers respond well, better than if we did it.
Let's go back to what Mike said. Whether we put it in effect or we don't is not gonna really do a damn thing. Period. It's not gonna do anything to the fish population. But you got to be aware of the optics of the situation, because perception is 99% of the truth. So, I'm not gonna make a motion one way or the other because it's not gonna affect the population. But the optics of it makes it a big deal.
Hey,
Christian, you getting some calls. Are they all in favor of, are they all suggesting we do something?
No, well, no, we're kind of getting both. There is a contingency that thinks that all those fish down east are mismanaged, and so therefore, they're generally just opposed to any action that marine fisheries takes. So we've heard that, but I have also taken calls of folks that for every other issue have been in that boat, so to speak, but are concerned because, they see this as a natural event that is impacting the fishery and is at nobody's fault. It's just nature, and we need to do our part to address it.
But not to put you on the spot, but I want to put you on the spot. I mean, if you were making this decision, what route would you go?
I would recommend, going forward with the temporary rule. I think that's the right thing to do. I also think that, moving forward with the temporary rule, it helps with the messaging, because if we're gonna say we encourage folks to be cognizant of this issue, be cognizant of catch and release mortality, things of that nature. And then, but at the same time, we're not taking whatever steps we can take. There's a little bit of a mixed message there. So
Perhaps this is also a teaching moment to the General Assembly that we need authority to be able to act in situations like this, which we don't have now. And Marine Fisheries Commission does.
Before I call on you, Brad's kind of beat me to the punch. So when the General Assembly was opposed, when we tried to get proclamation authority before, it's because we wanted to have overall authority, because that makes sense for us to have that, right? They might find it more palatable to give us proclamation authority if that action puts us in compliance with the proclamation for marine fisheries. Because that's the problem we have here, right?
That's part of where the problem is. Y'all correct me, I'm just the old head in history part here. My recollection is we tried to do that.
That's true.
My recollection, when we tried to do that, who opposed our ability to do it was the Division of Marine Fisheries. And that's where it got stopped. If I remember that correctly.
The Fisheries Association, but what John said would put us in agreement with them. Proclamation that puts us in agreement with them. And that way there's no conflict. All we're doing is eliminating a conflict.
What they're afraid of is that we're gonna do something on that we can have a proclamation that hurt the commercial side.
We wouldn't write it that way.
We wouldn't write that.
Yeah, because that's what we tried before we got him, right?
Yeah.
So we would have the option of being in compliance with their proclamation, but not be required to be.
That's what I. So we're still.
That would be.
Yeah, well, and if it's worded correctly and we're good with it, I'm fine with it. I wish we had it right now. All I'm just saying is we tried it before we got shot down by the Division of Marine Fisheries. But, all right, and now my second point, hang on. Very rarely do I find myself at odds with the staff, but on Christian's recommendation, I find myself on the opposite side of that. And in a very rare situation, and only that is, by the time whatever we take effect, our rules will take effect, there will be no more cold stun events at all. And all we're gonna do is prevent sportsmen being able to fish for them during a period of time. I think I mean, we're not gonna affect the event at all. All we're gonna do is deprive the public of being able to fish.
So
That would be a problem.
Let me ask Christian a quick question.
Yes.
Christian, the reason to do this, if we had proclamation authority, would be to prevent sportsmen from catching the fish because the population's been hammered.
yeah, so
So what we would want to stop them from fishing for them, is that right?
that would, yes, that's the thought process behind their fisheries, the fisheries management plan is that in the case of a natural cold stun, the population has already had an excessive amount of mortality. And so therefore additional harvest would just be insult to injury, if you will.
Which is response, I'm sorry.
So I just wanna, I'd love to see us have proclamation authority. I really want our attorney to advise us on the wording, because to have a proclamation authority that just kind of connects us with marine fisheries that we can only, are we only using it when they use it? And, where can we use it? I mean, guys, let's just be real careful about, let's get proclamation authority, but put so many limits on it that it really doesn't do what it's supposed to do for us. I do.
So Commissioner Craig, before I call on you, would have our attorney write it. But you're exactly right. It needs to be something we have the option of, but not the obligation.
Yeah.
I think
I have a question of it. When does the spawn occur?
The spawn is typically April timeframe, April, May.
When it goes through the summer. So generally by August, they're done. So why is Division of Marine Fisheries opening the fishery back up during the spawn, if there's any spawn occurring? If that's what we're concerned about, is catching what fish are left over before they reproduce. Why did they pick June 15th? And obviously, if the spawn goes through the summertime, our closing on May, it would have some effect. It would be minimal, but it would have some effect on the population.
So this is from their original fisheries management plan. It's a set date. That was June 15th date is a set date. If you look at their, Christian said it at maybe the very first slide he shared that this date could change based on recommendations to Amendment 1. And in Amendment 1, they actually have this date, June 30th and October 1st as options. So they may be moving this date. So they have not.
If that's the case, why would we not make our temporary rule from May 1st till at least the end of spawn, even though we know there'll be few fish, if any, in our joint and inland waters? Why don't we make it longer than their days?
Yeah, I think that's where the biology actually would come into it, is the fact that, those fish are moving out of the creeks and moving offshore to spawn. So they're in a different location when they spawn. So it's a different fishery. I mean, it's the same fishery, but it's a very different fishery in the sense that where they're being targeted and how they're being targeted would be very, very different. And so for us to put that restriction on, there just wouldn't be a biological reason. But at the same time, you're not likely to catch many trout up in our waters come August anyway. But if you do, you could harvest it.
Commissioner Beard?
To me, this is all a PR move. I think the biology of what I'm sensing and hearing is not, if we decide to do temporary rule, the effect will be in the eyes of the fishermen out there will be that we're more of a conservation group than if we don't do something proactive. So I've talked to fishing guys, Great Davis, I've talked to CCA guys, I've talked to just common fishermen out there, and they're all in favor of doing something. Now, what I really would like to know is from a proclamation authority standpoint, how long will it take us to get proclamation? You write it up, whatever. Well, how long does that take?
We don't have proclamations.
I know that. I'm saying, how long does it take if we decide?
Legislative matter.
It doesn't give us the authority. So we don't have the authority to do.
Yeah, we'd have to
I
get
understand
change the
that.
law.
I understand that. But if we want to obtain proclamation authority, what is that process?
Process. You could get it done this session if there was the appetite to vote.
Right, okay.
So
What we're saying is that the chance to do that for this decision is non-existent.
So could take 2 years, could be
Okay.
never, but I've seen them pass something in 36 hours. Matter to. So somewhere
Well,
between 36 hours and infinite and never.
So I think, I got it. I got the answer. So I'm with you, Christian. I think temporary rulemaking will send a signal that we're concerned about the species, period. And that we're trying to be proactive and we're trying to do something that is in concert with marine fisheries, whether we like it or not. I think the perception there is positive. So even though I don't think it's big impact one way or another.
Is that a motion, Commissioner Beard, that we have temporary rule?
I can make it a motion.
And this kind of goes along with what, Vice Chair Craig was
Yeah,
saying.
I'm not on committee. I can't make it.
We're saying that we have mortality beyond what we as an agency factor in for natural mortality. I mean, don't our regs take into consideration some natural mortality? And does this exceed that?
Yes, so our regs are again based on marine fisheries action, and their SMP does take in to consideration natural mortality, but then this would be an event where natural mortality exceeded, there was additional natural mortality on top of what was already factored into the models.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
I would like to make the motion that we proceed with temporary rulemaking. And also perhaps add language subject to what Commissioner Craig alluded to relative to some flexibility on the dates, per our biologist recommendations going forward.
Is there a second to that motion?
So moved.
Motion has been seconded. What discussion do you have about that motion?
I'd just like to add one other point to it, if I may, just as somebody who had a great speckled trout harvest myself and I just think if we didn't take, if we didn't take action here and perhaps the season going forward next year, we saw a major contraction in the fishing season. I think that could rebound against us in a negative light for not having taken whatever action we could have taken, even though it may be de minimis in terms of its outcomes.
Commissioner, I agree with you. Also, it might make it easier for Ashton to go talk to the General Assembly.
Yes.
About, look what we've had to
Yes.
do, because it's all we can do. This is what we need you to help us out.
Mr. Chairman, this doesn't really have anything to do with the motion. Are there any other species affected by this cold?
Yes, absolutely. Spotted sea trout is really the least tolerant. And so it's the one that you always have issues. But similar species that exhibit similar habitats, like red drum, for example, also there is mortality. It's not mortality to the extent that it is here, but it is mortality. And this isn't just a North Carolina problem. I mean, we've seen photos and video recently of major kills in Alabama that involved red drum. That was a cold stun event.
I've looked, and Tamara gave me a look, and I know what that look meant. We need to have a definitive date for rulemaking. So that I would suggest that we leave it just as they recommend. That you amend
my motion to say, yes, sir.
Hey, first. Anything you want to add?
June 30th, right?
If we are gonna pursue proclamation authority for an event like this, should it be limited to cold stun events or their heat stress events, hurricane, stormwater events that cause fish kills? These are extraordinary circumstances that we need to be able to react to. So if we're gonna try to get proclamation authority, shouldn't be limited to just cold stun.
Yeah, Commissioner Stanback, as I'm understanding you, that's more of a recommendation, not an amendment to this motion. So we can talk to the people that do that in the General Assembly about how to achieve that. Any other discussion?
Hold on just a minute. Tamara's still in my ear. Go ahead. Explain it to me.
So what Emory here are saying, suggesting is, so if the temporary rule were to, that we noticed was to October 1st, based on public feedback and based on information we learned between now and then, we could always shorten. If it's June 15th, and that's what's noticed, we cannot lengthen it, because that would be more restrictive instead of less restrictive. So, but will we note, will Division of Marine Fisheries, make a decision on either extending or not extending their date by, or maybe probably not. I don't think we're.
An April meeting?
Yeah.
No.
Do we have to notice and go through a whole process for shortening it? Can we do that by?
So you could do that just based on comments. But again, I mean, if we're not gonna have any more information, I think part of the problem is, so while I don't disagree with Commissioner Craig's assessment, part of the problem is if on June 15th, if our rule is then in effect and it's prohibited in our waters and Marine Fisheries opens it back up, it creates the same problem then for our constituents, because then they can't fish under our rules, but they can under Marine Fisheries rules. Which I think we all know where we think the actuality and whose rules take precedent, but that puts our officers in a bind as well.
Do you have a
Because then they're
recommended,
ticketing folks.
do you have a recommended date for the amended motion?
I would recommend June 15th.
June 15th, sir.
Margo, can you read the motion as amended?
All I have is that Alfred made a motion to go with the temporary rule with a date.
Amended to June 15th. Is there any other discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, nay. So the motion passes.
So we will bring that tomorrow for actual commission action.
Thanks, Chris. You kind of woke up the fisheries commission. Can you- Southern Management Area striped bass.
Yes, I will. Before I do that, I did want to say one thing about Proclamation Authority. The last time that we sought Proclamation Authority, it was very specific to instances where there was some type of human health issue, such as COVID, or it was related to some type of event, fish kill in particular, that would impact a population. And, you know, examples of that beyond just things like cold stun is like the coal ash spill that happened on the Dan River. You know, there was no action that this commission could actually have taken. And so that we had bounds on it. And then as y'all talked about, there was a fear that we would somehow impact commercial fishing, and that's where that ended.
That still exists today. I just want to be clear about that in all these discussions.
Yes.
Move to the next item, since we're talking about proclamation authority. I'd like to know from a commission standpoint, when is appropriate time to suggest that we proceed with proclamation authority?
Let's discuss that after.
Okay.
Yeah, so Christian, your point's well taken. It's not gonna be easy to do this just because it's us, right?
Yeah.
But, I mean, it would have a shot. It'd be worth it. It wouldn't be a waste of action.
Yeah. Yeah, I just wanted to clarify what we actually asked for in, I think that was 2021.
Mr. Stone, as you know, they created a committee last time just to stop that.
It ain't gonna happen.
You remember the agency bill or give up the proclamation?
Actually, I think they created that before then.
Well, close to it.
In anticipation of something.
Close to it.
Well, let me walk that back. I understand your point, Commissioner Crump. Commissioner Windham?
I'm in total agreement with Chairman Crump in the fact that we can go up there waving the flag for proclamation authority right now. The chances of us getting are slim and damn none, in my opinion.
That's overall proclamation authority. Yeah, that's a heavy lift, right? This may have a shot because it's just bringing us in compliance with what Marine Fisheries is already doing. It's a whole different thing. Still a heavy lift.
The committee, I don't know if this is the appropriate time or if you want me to wait till additional topics, but I just wanted to get a feel, maybe we do wait for additional topics of any changes to leadership at DEQ, DMF, appointments, directors, et cetera.
Yeah, let's save that for the end.
Okay.
There's nothing else. We're going to talk about striped bass.
Okay, this is a very quick item, and I just want to put it on your radar. You will be hearing more. We will be bringing stuff back to you. But so when they adopted the last management plan for striped bass for the Central Southern Management Area, and I've simply put a map up here to show you that it basically includes everything south of the Albemarle Sound. So Tar River, Neuse River, Cape Fear River are the three big ones, but it includes everything kind of in between there as well. So when they did that, the fisheries management plan indicated that in 2025 that they would analyze data through 2024, and it gave adaptive management options for implementing something different depending on what that analysis showed. And in particular, the question would be, should the fishery be opened? Because right now it is closed to harvest, particularly in the Neuse and Tar. And then there's also the issue of gill nets and the ferry line. Right now, they're restricted to only below the ferry line, not upstream of the ferry line. And so right now, there is an analysis ongoing of the 2024 data. Marine Fisheries, DMF, will definitely bring recommendations back to their commission as to what they should do about harvest. whether they should allow it or not, and how they should address gill nets moving forward. That will be in August is what they're scheduled right now to take that issue up. But I just want to give you all the heads up because there's definitely conversations going on out there, and I wanted to make sure you were aware of them and didn't get caught off guard. And the last thing I'll say on this is that staff are meeting with Marine Fisheries, trying to be productive on this issue, and we will certainly provide additional information as it becomes available.
Thank
And
you.
that's all I have for that one.
Corey Oakley, we'll talk about trout production following the hurricane.
Good morning, Commissioners. I will try to be brief. I know we're running out of time. So I wanted to briefly update you about trout production and our hatcheries after the flood of Hurricane Helene. You saw this the last Fisheries Committee, but this is a little bit of a further update. First, I just want to show you a few pictures. Work is being accomplished. If you see the picture at the top, that is a picture of the lower end of Armstrong Fish Hatchery right after the hurricane and all the damage that it received. And then that lower picture is it now. And so it has been cleaned up. We have water, so the intake has been repaired. We now have water in the lower raceways. And as of Monday, we have trout at Armstrong Fish Hatchery. And so that is only in that side of the lower raceway, so that it's split in two sides and the trout are on that right side, right as you're coming into the facility. This was the lower end intake. You see it up above what it was like right after the hurricane. You see now that the pipe has been reattached and they have actually filled that in and the road is being rebuilt right around that lower intake. And this is the road that leads to the office, which is just beyond that lower intake. It had a major landslide there that covered the road and the road was destroyed. And you see that road has now been reopened and you can actually see the office back in the distance. And so now a lot of the work at Armstrong is going to be focused on the upper end raceways, which are beyond those white gray buildings. They're on up. If you follow the road on up, if you've never been there, you keep following the road on up and you'll run into the upper end raceways. And that's where a lot of the damage to the facility is. In fact, the road doesn't exist for about, I don't know, 150 yards. So there's a lot of work to be done up there. But I just wanted to update you on that. I also want to update you on Setzer. This is at the intake. The picture above was right after the flood. You see a lot of debris there. And this has always been a problem here where we just have damage along the bank and we wanted to secure that better. And so you see the picture below and actually this has all been covered over now. You actually can't even see most of these stones. These are very large stones. I mean, they're huge. They're as big as that TV or bigger. And they've been filled with concrete and reinforced. And then I mentioned last time I was here, the stream that had been eat away, the picture on the left, you see that pipe. We've lost somewhere around 40 foot of bank between Fred and Helene. This is right near our facility. It's right beside the raceways at Setzer. And we had stream restoration folks, people from our staff, Scott Loftus led this. And you see the picture on the right. They've gone in, they've put in some very large natural rock and reshaped that stream to prevent that flooding from going into the facility. So that's just a little bit of update on what's going on with the hatcheries. Just about trout production, the number's wrong. It is 2025 trout stockings. Based on the numbers that we have at Setzer right now, will be reduced across the board by about 20% for the year. The reductions will be program-wide, including big fish as well. And that's just because we lost so many fish at Armstrong and we're not going to be able to do that. Fish transfers have already started from Setzer to both our Table Rock and Armstrong Fish Hatchery. As I mentioned, we do have trout at Armstrong as of Monday. Armstrong will initially receive about 180,000 trout, and that's still ongoing. Those are both catchables and subcatchables for grow out. And we'll start stocking our HS and DH streams that are able to be stocked. We have, I think, 10 or 11 streams that are unable to be stocked at this point because of damage. But that's all being told, that's pretty good that we're only down 10 or 11 sites, and that will begin in March when the season is closed. So that's trout. Any questions about trout, Armstrong, or Setzer?
That's the residents that are upstream from the office.
The one residence that's upstream is basically inhabitable at this point. What we have found is that there is some moisture issues. When the flood happened, the river the creek, Armstrong Creek jumped out of its banks and basically surrounded the house and probably went under the house. I mean, we don't know because it was middle of the night, most of that happened. But we've gone back since and we have a lot of moisture issues in that house.
Staff residence.
Go ahead, Kyle.
Downstream.
Oh, yeah, that house is completely gone. Yeah, it's gone. It's right when you enter the facility, that private residence is it was completely washed away. Our staff out, 2 out of 3 are fine. The ones that are there's 2 that are right at the lower end raceways and they would sit up on a hill. Those are fine. The one that's at the very it's above the very upper end raceways. That is the one that has moisture problems and we have remediation coming in to figure out what's going on and how to fix it. Any other questions?
Or you want to give us a quick?
It's going to be quick. I promise it'll be brief. All right. Just want to briefly update you about the podcast. We're doing a little bit of changing in 2025. Not much, but for the most part, the podcast has been where you can find it on like Apple, iTunes, Spotify, that kind of, it's all been audio. This year, starting in January, we have switched to both. You'll still be able to get it that way, but you'll also be able to see us on YouTube on video. So you get to see my ugly face if you want to. So you can see us. We are now on YouTube. You go to our YouTube channel at NC Wildlife Commission, and you will see our beautiful faces if that's what you so desire to do. That's not what I desire to do, but anyway. We also, at the same time, we want to be able to, make it a little more professional looking. So we've downstairs in the ground floor, we have put up a podcast studio where you can. This is what it'll look like from now on. The first one, January's didn't have this. We've since built this out. And this is what it looks like when you're being recorded. So that's what the podcast studio looks like. I just want to briefly show you some that in case you're not listening, some of the podcast episodes, a really great one on carping, which is carp fishing, in case you didn't know what that was called, by Dion Kerr, who's our D1 fish biologist, and he was super excited about carping. November was aquatic nuisance species with Rachel. December, we talked with Matt Airy and Brian Thrift. And if you don't know who they are professional bass fishermen from the state of North Carolina. Both of them are very good. In fact, Brian Thrift won like $300,000 a year ago in a tournament. In January, we talked about aquatic animal response to natural disasters. It was just Ben and I, but we had a ton of questions about that because of Hurricane Helene. So we wanted to address that. And that's one of the great things about our podcast is we're able to address issues as they come to us. And so it's really a great tool that we have to share our information from our agency. And then you see the future ones that we have going. Christian's going to be on it. And then we'll talk about white bass and we'll talk about Lake Hiwassee trophy stripers at some point in the month of May. So that's it. One great thing about the video is our CMDE will be able to utilize snippets and clips on our social media and be able to share information maybe a little bit easier than what it is through the podcast. So that's why we're going to video as well.
Thank you very much for that.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
We're at our limit, but Commissioner Coley, you have something that you want to talk about?
Yeah, that's with the new governor and so forth. I didn't know if there was any update on who is heading up DEQ, who the director is of DMF. If there's been, I know there's been some turnover even beforehand of the commissioners and so forth, and just kind of want to get if there's been many kind of updates of any.
So Reed Wilson, who was the Secretary of Natural and Cultural Resources, is now the Secretary of DEQ. Kathy Rawls is still the Director of DMF, and I'm not aware of any other changes on the board at this point, other than the new chairman's Sammy Corbett. It's been on their board for a long time.
He has been on.
Yes, sir.
Is anybody?
He's from Hampstead.
He's a commercial fisherman.
Yeah, I've got a couple of them I talked to you.
Thought, yeah.
It's in the works.
Be nice to print a sheet of when the ones come up.
Since we're starting to get into the big game committee's time, I'm going to adjourn the meeting unless there's objection. Meeting adjourned.
Well, I'm gonna start the February 5th kick game. This meeting is being streamed live and recorded for a public record. A recording of this meeting will be available at www.ncwildlife.org. At this time, I'm gonna have Mark go for a roll call.
I'm gonna do a roll call for our big game committee members. Committee Chair David Hoyle.
Here.
Committee Vice Chair Wes Seeger.
Here.
Steve Wyndham.
Here.
John Coley.
Here.
Tom Berry.
Here.
Don Alexander.
Here.
And ex officio members Monty Crump.
Here.
Mark Craig.
Here.
Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
I've got 100% attendance. Since fisheries cut in so deep to our meeting, we'll get moving right along with, Brad.
Well, I'm known for my brevity, so this'll. Yeah, it didn't have nothing to do with that, though. I'm gonna present this morning, I'm gonna present the Wildlife Management Division rule packages. We'll have a couple rules later this afternoon, but most of our rules are applying to deer. And quite frankly, most of it is related to our next move with CWD. And we introduced some of these topics early in the December meeting, but I wanna talk a little bit. Our staff has spent a lot of time debating and discussing our efforts and as we transition to a management phase for our CWD management in these counties where we have it. A couple of things I just want to remind everybody, make sure as we're doing these rules, some of the kind of the givens, CWD will inevitably spread. And the prevalence rate will increase over time. However, we've put together a package here that we think will try to help slow that rate at which that occurs and continue to maintain our hunting traditions. We want to make some modest changes in deer management that should be reasonably well supported by our hunters. We want to try our best to emphasize simplicity and avoid, to the extent possible, complex disease management regulations that other states have tried to use. And then we want to, our desire is to put these packages in place. This will be for the 2026 deer season. And then watch these for 3 to 5 years and see, identify some metrics and see, what the impacts of these rule changes are. There are really 4 basic CWD proposals. The first is to create and identify our CWD management area counties. And these will basically be the counties where we have positive detections, with one exception. We're going to go ahead and add Forsyth County to that package, because if you see and Miranda's going to get in a little bit more detail in the next presentation about where our positives are and some of our heat maps and those things. But you see, there are 2 positives right on the Forsyth County line on 2 different borders. And so we're going to go ahead and it's in all likelihood, CWD is in that northwest corner of Forsyth County. So we're going to go ahead and put Forsyth into the CWD. We're going to recommend that we put Forsyth into the CWD management area counties. This is a big transition for us, and we talked about this briefly in December. I did have discussions with other wildlife chiefs in other states, specifically in the Southeast, about this concept of change the carcass transportation rules and put more emphasis on disposal. And there's a number of different states that have already done this. Texas has done it. Missouri, I think this year, has started it. Tennessee has it west of the Tennessee River, where their CWD hot zones are. Basically, the concept here is to quit with all you can move a deer from the green counties to the blue counties and the blue counties to the red counties, but you can't move from red to green counties and all that stuff, and just emphasize disposal. The current transportation rules are complex. We're pretty positive they're not completely being followed by the hunters. We get calls all the time with deer showing up at processors in places they're not supposed to be.
So hopefully this will lead to better adherence by our hunters and better overall CWD management. It's important to point out, we're not recommending at this time to change our importation rules from out of state. We're going to keep those like they are. That is consistent across most states now. And so we're going to keep those as they are. We're recommending that we implement this carcass disposal rule statewide, not just in the CWD areas. This rule change will repeal the transportation restrictions out of the surveillance area rule. It will require all waste serving carcasses or carcass parts originating from North Carolina to be disposed of in basically these three methods. You can bury it 3 foot deep, 300 feet from a flowing stream or public water body. You can dispose of it in a landfill, or you can leave it on the ground at the property of a kill. It does not prohibit people from using disposal routes like trash pickup, transfer stations, Servant Health cooperators. If they take it to the processor, that is legal disposal. The processor will take care of it. Processor has to dispose of it in one of these ways. It's a transition from where we started. We're going to keep our "Don't Give It a Ride" tagline, but we're going to add a little bit to it and say, put it in the right place or something along those lines. The hope is that over time we will get hunters to recognize that, the important thing of, if you're hunting in an area and you take a deer somewhere else, the important thing is dispose of it properly. Don't just throw it out behind the house, because you may be throwing a positive deer out there. One of our season change recommendations for the Northwest area is to shift the timing of harvest earlier in the hunting season and before peak breeding, with an effort hopefully to increase an opportunity for hunters to take adult bucks that are making long distance excursions at that point in time, and to get out in front of the yearling dispersal and actually try to reduce that yearling dispersal, which is, as we've said, is a complete flip of what we want to do in most other counties across the state. But one of our thought process here is CWD is going to most likely spread. If it doesn't spread by people moving it somewhere, it's going to spread by these dispersals, the yearling bucks going elsewhere. So we're going to try to contain that to the extent we can by getting out in front of that, kill more bucks on the front end of the season. We've set some management goals for these CWD counties now, and one of them is to try to get that buck harvest more than 70%, or at least 70% of that buck harvest in front of peak breeding, to help reduce that dispersal and hopefully slow the spread of this disease to the extent that we can for as long as we can. So in those counties, we're going to shift the timing of black powder and gun seasons to open 1 week earlier than they currently do in Forsyth, Stokes, Surrey, Wilkes, and Yadkin. The opening date of archery won't change. That's a statewide opening date for archery, but it's important to note that this will shorten the archery season in these counties by a week, the archery only season. They can still continue hunting through black powder and firearm seasons. Right now, we're not recommending any changes for the Cumberland County season. It's an earlier season already down there in the southeastern zone, and we got one more year of searching down there. Surveillance. This will be the third year of surveillance coming up. Here's another unique idea we're throwing out on the table: a special early season, a velvet season, in all of the CWD management area counties, which would include Cumberland. And this is again to encourage additional antler buck harvest, especially the older bucks. They're still going to be in bachelor groups at that point in time. They're often out in the fields. You can see the bigger bucks out there. And they are the ones that are most likely to have CWD and therefore spread it. And so this is, this will also increase an opportunity to take adult and yearling bucks prior to that dispersal area. And, and the concept here is just make it in those counties to make it a unique and special opportunity in those CWD counties. We're recommending right now that it would be a 2-day antler buck only season, probably, the fourth Saturday of August and the Sunday, that weekend, the weekend of the fourth Saturday. All lawful weapons, normal seasonal $2 bag limit would apply unless they were hunting on properties that were in the CWD map. And they had those tags, they could use as many of those as they wanted to. And it would be on all lands, public and private. So that's the end of the CWD, the four CWD proposals that we're bringing out. You want to take questions and discuss those real quick before I've got one more positive deer proposal, but I thought maybe you want to pause right here and just talk about those. Yes, sir.
Say 26, 27. Is there a reason we can't back that up to 25, 26 this year?
We can't get the rules in place this year.
But is that, why can't we?
Rulemaking process. I mean, we're in it right now. So we'll be, so we'll bring these back with the rule text in April. You guys will vote on them in June, and then they'll go to public hearing in August. So they won't come into effect until the following year. Theoretically, well, I mean, I guess theoretically, I don't know, Carrie can speak to this. I don't think we want to necessarily use a temporary rulemaking process for this. We really have one more surveillance year in Cumberland County, and we're wrapping up our stuff up in the Northwest. So we feel like we know where it's at. So it's basically, again, it's just like the fisheries discussion. It just becomes a matter of the rulemaking process and the time it takes to get them in line.
Thanks for your answer.
Mhm.
Question?
Yeah,
Oh, that's true. Yes. That's a good point, Chris. We this fall, because Kyle will now have proclamation authority relative to the surveillance areas, mandatory testing and all that. So we are discussing and talking about relaxing some of that even for this upcoming deer season in some of these surrounding counties. We haven't narrowed that down to exactly. We may not even have a mandatory testing period because we're getting pretty good response and sample stuff. But so we have the option of what we do in the surveillance areas. Kyle can do that by proclamation. So, but we can't do any of these things by proclamation.
that's kind of where I was going with it, Chris. Think exactly that, but carry it further. Seems like CWD is the one thing we can do by proclamation or get done immediately, correct? Emergency rule. And so with that, couldn't we just do an emergency rule till this goes through the proper rulemaking process to make it permanent?
Emergency rule has to be approved by the governor, and it has to be pretty extenuating.
Okay, that answers my question.
I mean, from a biological standpoint, we're pretty comfortable with this timeline of getting that in place, getting our hunters ready for this transition to now we're in CWD management phase. So, you know, I think our timeline here is not terribly out of line. It's, you know, we'll be starting to tell them as we get into this fall and we're out there working with them, look, we're going to management next year and this is what's going to happen. It's going to be in these counties and the season's going to shift and some of this, you know, we're going to take this to public hearing. So we'll see what some of the hunters, you know, what they think about some of this.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. On a more positive deer note, this is actually a change to our 10B whitetail deer rule. One of the things I didn't mention before, we're going to pull the CWD management area counties out of the deer season rule and put them in the CWD management area rule. So, because we know those counties are positive, they're always going to be positive. And as we add new counties, if we have to, we'll put those deer seasons over there. So that's just that's a moving counties from one rule to another rule. But we're also recommending to increase either sex seasons for deer on private lands in 6 western season counties: Avery, Burke, Caldwell, Madison, Mitchell, and Yancey. We're recommending going to full season either sex in those counties. And we're also going to go to full season either sex in Cleveland, Rutherford, and Polk, which are actually in the northwestern deer season. This is in response to the continuing improving deer populations in western, especially in District 8 and that part of the western season. And you know, it's time to go ahead and we want to kind of try to stay in front of the deer management on these. Historically, we've sometimes drug along too long. and not made those changes. And I think, and we're, you know, the deer committee and our biologists over there are saying it's time to make those changes. So, and I think this will be, it's not time to make them on public lands. Public lands are separate. We set those either sex seasons by the game land. So, but this will be for private land.
Question about this?
I'm gonna make one more before I turn it over to Miranda. This has nothing to do with CWD or anything, but I couldn't figure out where to put this in there, and we got them scheduled, and we don't have a small game wild turkey committee meeting, but we have set up our turkey forums for this spring to go out and talk to the turkey hunters about our turkey data and stuff, and so we'll be notified. They'll be in March. What we're doing one in the coast, one in the Piedmont, one in the mountain region. And so I'll be sending out information about that, but I wanted to give you a heads up that we've got those scheduled now. That I'll turn it over to Miranda.
Good morning. I'm Miranda Turner, the wildlife health biologist, and I'm just going to give a very brief update on how our 2024-25 CWD sampling season went. Cool. So some general numbers. So far, we've collected 22,174 samples and received back 17,600 not detected results. We did receive 8 positive samples, which I will come back to in a little bit, and 109 inconclusive results. Those are typically from when incorrect tissues are pulled from a deer or the sample degrades so much that the test can't be performed. But 109 out of 22,000 is just about half of 1%. So we are pretty pleased with how our sampling quality went this season. And we are still awaiting results from 4,457 samples. My favorite fun fact of the season that I've been spreading a lot is that we actually took samples from 5 different cervid species. So we did get our typical white-tailed deer and elk, but we also did get a moose and a sika deer from illegal importations, and 1 fallow deer that escaped from a high fence facility after Hurricane Helene and was then harvested in the western part of the state. So I think that is a neat fact, and also shows kind of our collaboration with law enforcement and our biologists and our technicians working together to collect a lot of samples and samples from across the state. And lastly, we managed to decrease the amount of time from when a hunter harvests their deer to when they receive their CWD results to 37 days, which is a pretty big improvement from 54 days last year. It is one of the chief things we hear about from hunters is how long it takes to get their test results. So we are pretty happy that we've managed to decrease that amount of time a little bit. Just going to show you a little bit on number of samples we've collected over the years. You can clearly see a big increase once CWD was detected in the state, which is that orange box right there. That peaked last year at around 36,000. You can see that we did have a large decrease in the number of samples we collected this year. That was on purpose. After last year, we felt very comfortable with our knowledge of where CWD was in the state and the number of samples that we need to feel confident with our sampling effort. So we did decide to decrease our number of samples, and that was primarily done via placing a cap on the cervid health cooperator samples, so we didn't oversample from certain areas of the state, and by reducing that mandatory testing period in the surveillance areas. This kind of shows where our samples are coming from. So that chart on the left shows our past 3-year average of where our sample sources are versus our sample sources for this year. And the main takeaway that I want you to get from this is that we are steadily increasing the number of samples we're getting from our cervid health cooperators, those meat processors and taxidermists. That is a really important program for us because they give us a lot of samples. They give us a lot of positive samples, and they involve kind of local communities and businesses in our surveillance and bring awareness to CWD. So that's a program that we're really happy with and have expanded and are planning to continue to expand. And one other important point here is that the use of freezers has been pretty consistent. Freezers that we place across the state are available 24/7, so they're one of the easiest ways that a hunter can put a head in 24/7 any day of the week. So we're glad to see that their continued use has been going on for the past few years. So jumping back into those positives, like I said, we got 8 new positives during the season. 7 were in that northwestern surveillance area 1, And one of them was in that southeastern surveillance area 2. Again, 75% of those new positives came from that Cervid Health Cooperator Program, which again shows how beneficial it is. They do give us a lot of our positives that we find. And 75% of those came from adult bucks. So that is exactly what we expect to find. Adult bucks are the most at-risk group of deer due to their behaviors, especially during the rut. So things are kind of on track with what we are expecting to see. And then zooming out a little bit, to looking at all of our positives, we now have 32 total in the state, and 60% of those have been found from the CHC program, and 87.5 of those have been from adult bucks. Exactly what we expect to see for our disease trend. So I just wanted to show you where we're finding our positives, give you a look at that map. So those green points are the ones that we found this year in surveillance area 1. You can see a pretty tight cluster right around the Surrey-Yadkin border. And you can see the points from other years kind of spread pretty fairly evenly around that border. So yep, right on top of where we found that very first case is where we are continuing to pick up the majority of our positives. Going into our surveillance area 2, our positives are mostly centered in southern Cumberland County. That's approximately a 13-mile span between the different positives. You can see that one green one that we found this year is the first one to be south of the Cape Fear River. So something that we're definitely going to continue to monitor in the future. So taking what we can see here from our the known locations of our positives, we then did a little bit of modeling based on where our known positives are and natural deer movement behaviors to create this map showing likelihood of finding new CWD positives. So taking into account deer movement, so deer will disperse from where they're born about 5 miles on average in North Carolina, and kind of the maximum dispersal that we would expect to see is 30 miles. So taking that into account, you can see here the likelihood of locations of where we're going to find new CWD, most likely. So that Surrey-Yadkin border, again, big hotspot there, as expected. As Brad mentioned, one of the reasons that we are going to be including Forsyth into our CWD management areas is because of that likelihood that you can see in the northwest part of that county for finding new CWD positives. And that kind of dashed border is that 30-mile radius, kind of anything inside of there, we would potentially expect to find new CWD positives based on natural deer movement. So here's that map for the surveillance area 2. Important to kind of point out here is that likelihood is smaller across the board for surveillance area 2. And it's really mostly centered on southern Cumberland County, just a tad bit in Sampson and Bladen. It is important to note that with these heat maps, they can only take into account potential CWD spread based on natural deer movements. So it can't account for human-caused movements or other animals. So things like a hunter moving an infected carcass across county lines, or something like vultures or scavengers moving infected meat around, unfortunately can't be accounted for by these maps. But our current regulations and messaging on disposal and things along those lines are at least kind of take into account the human aspect. So we're feeling pretty confident that these heat maps are a good predictor of where CWD can be expected to be found in the future. So we wrapped up 2024-25. So now let's start looking at future seasons. So in the future, we expect to continue to emphasize the Cervid Health Cooperator Program because it gives us so many good samples and gives us a good number of our positive samples as well. We're going to continue to improve the test result timeline, hopefully. We'd really like to shorten that from below 37 days as much as we can. Additionally, we're working on CWD research. Currently, we have a collaboration with Mississippi State University, testing new CWD testing methods on soil from deer scrapes and twigs from licking branches to see what the potential is for using that kind of new technology to find CWD on the landscape across the state. So we're going into our 3rd year of that project in Surveillance Area 1, and we've just expanded it for the 1st year in Surveillance Area 2. So we're excited about the potential there, and we'll be sharing our results once we have them all back in. And then lastly, as you heard from Brad, We are going to be transitioning from surveillance into management in the next couple of years. So we're excited to have new regulations and messaging that'll hopefully be impacting CWD in the state for many years to come. Are there any questions about CWD sampling this season?
Questions?
So a question, it might be for either you or for Chris. How have especially in the affected areas, the deer processors, have they seen their business drop, or if it dropped, does it pick back up with folks, taking their deer in so they get processed?
I mean, they've certainly adapted to it. They've had questions from their customers. In some cases, they've changed their methodology a little bit. They process deer more emphasis on individual processing and not mixing venison together from one deer to another. But in general, I think their businesses have stayed pretty solvent. It hasn't, to my knowledge, nobody's quit processing or going out of business.
And I guess the second part of that would be, when you're taking a deer to a landfill, because it's hard for me to see that many people, unless you have equipment digging a 3-foot deep hole to put it in. Are you supposed to like triple bag it or do something like, I mean, is there, and what type of landfills actually accept deer or whatever? I mean, I know some debris or not. What kind of landfills do you take one to?
It would depend on the landfill. I don't know about the triple bagging type requirement, but there are lots of them that will just accept the whole carcass animal that's deposited there. In terms of burial, that's pretty common on hunting clubs, that maybe have a clubhouse or something that they use. So, kind of coming back to what Brad was talking about with the rules, of course, the devil is in the details of how we write the particulars of that rule, but our goal with that is to keep people from doing the wrong thing, which is to move a carcass a long way and simply deposit it on top of the ground. But there are going to have to be a lot of accommodations for different requirements that might come along with transfer into a landfill. Or
when you take one to a landfill, like sometimes I don't frequent them a whole lot, but you go and there's big dumpsters there that you can put, if it's furniture, it goes in here or there, or whatever. I mean, you just drive up there and just toss it into the.
Sometimes, yes.
Toss it right into the big dumpster and that's it.
Sometimes, yes, that's, the transfer stations, sometimes like that, where you're not actually putting it into the landfill itself. So, yeah, sometimes it is.
Thank you.
So along those same lines, are these taxidermists and meat processors getting paid enough? Are they complaining about it or?
No, I think I can answer that a little bit. We did adjust the amount that we paid them for a few years prior. I think we definitely hit the sweet spot last year. We're currently paying $10 per head, $20 per lymph node pair. And that is part of the reason how we got over 36,000 samples last year and why we enacted a cap this year. So we have plenty of taxidermists and processors that are willing to help out because we definitely found the right price.
And just to add to that, the processor that will in Harnett County that we've taken several deer to over the years is very thankful for that. I mean, that's real money to them. I mean, it may not sound like a whole lot, but they are very happy to be able to. I mean, it makes it worth their while. This guy anyway.
And I think it's worth noting that we could, providing them some compensation for doing that is cheaper than we can do it ourselves. So it's a win-win.
Yeah, we never get any. Then they've got to be the ones to go dispose of it, as well. I mean, so.
Well, they do, and that's one of the reasons we're kind of thinking about going to this. That's why we're sort of proposing this because, I know the chairman of the big game committee calls me frequently and say, "Hey, another deer showed up," and and we have to get it disposed of correctly. And so this way, you take it to the processor. The processor knows what to do. You take it to the taxidermist. They know what to do. They know how to contain the brain. They know how to contain the carcass. They dispose of it properly. And we think we'll get better management and better compliance with that process.
Is there thoughts of having a disposal fee that's different than just the getting the samples and so forth?
Well, they have to dispose of the deer carcasses anyway.
This particular guy this past year you have to go ahead and have skin now. He switched where he won't accept,
Yeah, he wants some skin. That's
so he wants you to skin it in place, which is, now that we can take one out of, so a different processor outside of the county, he'll lose that business because we'll take it to a processor that'll accept the whole deer versus trying to go out there and skin it where it falls.
Any other question? Thank you very much. Colleen.
Before I give an update on preliminary numbers for the deer and bear, I did want to introduce two new biologists. I'm very thrilled that they're here. So on January 6th, it was a big day because it was the first day for our new bear biologist and our new fur bear biologist. I wanted to introduce them briefly right now. I'll just Jenna Malzahn, stand up. This is our new bear biologist. Jenna comes to us. She went to undergrad at University of Michigan, and then she went to Auburn University for her master's and was actually in charge of a pretty large Alabama bear study while she was there. But now we have her. So yeah, hopefully welcome her at lunch. Hopefully say hi to her. She's just starting, as is our fur bear biologist. So don't overwhelm her. But yeah, we'll get up to speed on bear issues in North Carolina. And then thanks, Jenna. And then Caitlin Brett in the back, stand up. Caitlin Brett is our new fur bear biologist. She comes to us from Ohio State University for undergrad, and then she went to University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley for graduate school. And some of you may know her because before coming to us and becoming our fur bear biologist, she was actually running the coastal bear study that's, trying to extrapolate the bear density and bear population of the coastal bear management units. She was in charge of hiring, in the end, 50 people and working with hundreds of landowners. She made a lot of good connections with private landowners that she carried over into working for us now. So thanks, Caitlin. All right. Harvest. I'm going to emphasize these are preliminary. I know we have electronic reporting now. We don't have the days of paper reporting like we did years and years ago, but even so it's electronic, there is still some cleaning involved. We do find, especially with the app, the Go Outdoors app, we do have hunters, they do the fat finger registration. They click bear instead of deer. And with our new Go Outdoors reporting system, unlike the previous system that we had, we don't have the safeguards in place that we had before. So it is possible for someone to accidentally report a bear in a season that's not yet open. And so that's the type of cleaning we're doing, is kind of looking at those odd registrations, as well as comparing the bear tooth envelopes we get with what was reported and seeing if there's discrepancies, and then trying to find out which is correct, the report or the bear tooth envelope. Same with deer. We do a lot of cleaning with deer. Plus, we still have urban archery seasons open. So the harvest numbers you see don't include the reported harvest yet from urban archery. So for bears, another record harvest. This is our third year in a row in which the bear harvest statewide was over 4,000. You can see there the harvest by not only our bear management units, coastal, mountain, and Piedmont, but also by male and female. There in the coast, the female sex ratio was 46%, which is a bit lower than what it has been the past few years. To be honest, I was relieved by that. I think the magic number for, the composition of the harvest should be anywhere from 43 to 46% female. So we went back to that sweet spot on the coast. The mountain bear management unit, we are perpetually stuck at 35%. I think this is the third year in a row in which the composition was 35%. But that is why hopefully we'll see some changes this coming season, in which hopefully the bear season in the mountains will start 9 days earlier. We'll find out more about that in March, if that will happen. And in the Piedmont, record harvest, 105 bears. So that's the first time we hit over 105 bears in the Piedmont. Basically, if you compare it to the previous season, which these graphs show, you can just see not only is our bear harvest continue to increase, continue to have record harvest, second year in a row in which not only a record harvest statewide, but a record harvest in all three bear management units. We saw that Right now, it looks like the Mountain Bear Management Unit, the harvest increased 5% compared to last year. Coastal, it increased 3% compared to last year, and the Piedmont, it was 19%. And in particular with the mountains, you know, when the hurricane hit, lots of questions. How will this impact the bear harvest? Will this impact hunter access? Basically hunters' ability to even go out there. And certainly, probably at the beginning of the season, it did. I haven't had the time to work with Jenna to look at the harvest by day during the last season. But just anecdotally talking to our bear hunters that hunt in the mountains, certainly, of course, the hurricane impacted them directly, impacted their homes, their families, even their dogs. Unfortunately, there were stories of some of our dog hunters in which, so, you know, their dogs were wiped out in the floods. Pretty tragic. But it seemed like after that first month, our bear hunters, they were ready to get back in the woods and hunt. They just might have had to hunt in different places than they're used to because of access issues. And so I will admit, I think quite a few of us were relieved when we saw how robust that harvest was in the mountains. That initially, again, I think the hurricane initially impacted harvest, but then it recovered by November and December. All right, I'm going to move on to deer. All right, and I want to thank April, our deer biologist, for pulling these numbers. Overall, the story with the deer harvest in North Carolina is it wasn't a record harvest. That occurred last year, but this was the second highest harvest we have experienced in the state. So, you know, Brad earlier talked about the good news we have, especially in Western North Carolina, leading to that proposal to change either sex season. This is another good news good news is the record harvest we are seeing, and we're seeing how robust our deer harvest is, and that does represent the health of our deer herd overall in the state. We do see that when you look by zone, you know, some areas actually were a bit above last year's record harvest, some areas were below, but still, when you compare the overall harvest to the past 3-year average, again, this is higher than the past 3-year average. And this is just a graph showing the harvest over time by sex and age. And so that blue line is antlered buck. Again, you see the trend continue of just increase in harvest of antlered buck, increased harvest of doe. I asked April, you know, so what do you make of this? And her answer was pretty much the simple answer, and that is, we've got a healthy deer herd. This is a lot of good news. She will be analyzing to see over the next few weeks, especially once the harvest is final, to see how we're meeting our objectives for the deer herd in the various zones. But the one thing she said is our doe harvest is close to where we want it to be. I think you said it was around 43%, and we went around 45%. So we're right there. Yeah. And I think that's it. I did want to note that one thing I asked April to do, and I kind of looked at the numbers too, is, you know, there's been questions over time. What's the harvest like where we've had our CWD positives? What's happening with deer harvest in those counties? Are we seeing hunters? You know, you asked about the processors. Are we losing processors? But the same question is, how are hunters changing their harvest in light of CWD positives in their counties or CWD positive in an adjacent county? And we initially see maybe the harvest dips a little, but then it recovers. And what we're seeing in those CWD positive counties and the adjacent counties is that the harvest now is similar to 3- and 5-year averages. So it recovered. So thankfully, our hunters are still very enthusiastic about harvesting deers in those counties. So another piece of good news. And I guess with that, if there's any questions.
What would you anticipate? I'm sorry. Go ahead. What would you anticipate is the population of deer in North Carolina?
I'll let April answer that.
I think at least the last estimate from a few years ago was 1.2 million. Still working. I need to run last year's data through things because with the good thing about the CHC program as well, and with our CWD sampling, we got samples for 36,000 deer, and a lot of that increased our ages. We increased the number of ages that we have in our system and such. That I think about 1.2, 1.3 million. Really helpful.
Thank you very much.
Back up one slide, please. I just got to get a number.
Yeah.
Got it. Go. I'm done.
Okay, and again, this is preliminary. Probably won't change too much, but I want to emphasize it's preliminary. We should in the next month have the final, well, month or two, I guess April, we'll have it, the final numbers.
What would our bear population be in the state?
So overall, we estimate 17 to 20,000. We probably have about 9 to 10,000 in the mountains. And right now, based off of population reconstruction, we estimate we have 11 to 13,000 in the coastal bear management unit. However, that study that we've had going on for just over 2 years will give us an unbiased population estimate. Right now with population reconstruction, that's based off the age at harvest for our bears.
How many in the Piedmont?
We don't, I couldn't tell you. That is something that's challenging is population reconstruction depends on age at harvest. But when you have yeah, we've had over 100 bears harvested in the Piedmont. That's still such a low number. It's really hard to extrapolate. I just was working with Jenna a few days ago. One thing we will be doing this year is updating the bear range map of where we have established bear populations. Established bear populations being defined as evidence of breeding females. So that's one thing we'll be doing this year is updating that range map. And certainly we're going to see that established bear population further expand into the Piedmont. Last time we did that was 2010, and bears occupied about 60% of the state. My guess is now it's probably about 75%, but we'll be working on that. But as to a number, if you ask me ballpark, just what do I think? Oh, we have a few hundred bears in the Piedmont at least. If I had to, just give a guesstimate. Yeah.
Once you get the 2 submissions for the Piedmont, will y'all be able to obviously tell us kind of what the age structure of those bears is? Obviously, with it being so many more males, you would think that they're the 2-3-year-old males that are expanding their territory or getting kicked out. But I assume you'll be able to, y'all will look at what that age structure.
We will, yeah. So, and I do that every year. The annual report is on the website and it has data through the 2023 season. And Piedmont's what you expect. Most of those bears harvested are young male bears. Certainly when you compare the age structure of the Piedmont to the coast and mountain bear management units, that age at harvest is much younger, but it is changing. And we are starting to see not only more females being harvested, but more adult females being harvested. So certainly are seeing that change as there's further expansion into the Piedmont. But yes, we'll be doing that with the teeth we get from the most recent bear hunting season.
And once you get all your data, do y'all go and kind of look back and see when was the peak rut for Eastern Piedmont Mountains kind of, y'all?
Yeah, for bears, I mean, breeding's pretty. Oh, for deer. Okay, I was on the.
Deer, I'm sorry, that was my question was about trying, because I get all my friends always, when's the rut happening? And then all of a sudden they go, I guess it's already been or not. I look at more like the number of deer that are killed by vehicles as to what I think that they're,
April.
We continue to add
Yeah.
opportunistically to the peak conception date numbers, especially hoping now that we've got these counties open in the west later into July, we'll start to get better data for that. But pretty much, though the dates are those dates, that's kind of evolutionary. That's when they're doing it. And activity can vary on a number of different things. But that peak conception stays fairly common. And remember, that's the peak. So it's happening way before it and way after it. But that map's on our webpage, and we do continue to add data.
Yeah. As we get samples,
The better for zeroing in on that. But you can take that date that's on the map and what we typically call the rut, probably add 2 weeks in front of that date and give or take, and that's when they're really chasing and they're out there all over the place. And a lot of times what people talk about roadkill stuff, that's yearling buck dispersal. A lot of times that's what you're seeing with that. That's when you see all these young bucks dead all over the road.
Is that then probably happening right before is that in that chasing period where they're being run off?
It's all wrapped up together, but that dispersal's happening, what, up to a month before, up to about a month before that peak concession dates windows year. Which goes back to our CWD rules and how this all ties in. In those areas, we want to get shooting them early and keep them.
I don't know if we can track this, but just out of curiosity. How many vehicle strikes there? I think it was around 19,000 a few years ago. Is that still pretty close or?
We don't track it.
I didn't think we tracked, I just think.
But there was a time, Evan might can comment.
Well, DOT used to have a traffic crash back publication, but I've been out to Deer World now for 3 years.
I have not seen those.
State Farm, I think is the most. Is what we use, their estimates, typically. We actually, we're looking through that a couple months ago. They have it for each state. And there's like a percent that you would multiply vehicle collisions by to get your number of deer.
I just know the last time that talked about it, which was several years ago, like 19,000 something in that particular year, there was 6 fatalities associated.
I always remind people when we're talking relative to deer vehicle collisions, it a lot of times has less to do with the number of deer, more to do with the amount of roads and the number of cars on the roads. So, you can't always say, oh, more deer equals more. It does not necessarily.
Right.
But yeah, they get these estimates, but as far as I know, nobody's tracking deer for deer. What the actual collisions are.
Any other questions?
David, one thing I want to say. And I've heard you say it before, about how good a job we do managing our species, all of our sportsmen and citizens of North Carolina ought to be encouraged on what they've seen today with what we're seeing with deer harvest, the tweaks we're making with turkey coming forward with issues there that we've seen, the maturation of our CD management plan, over the years. Just wishing other agencies, I'm not calling names, did a good job on their species management. You see here done. My hat's off to the staff, studies, the hours y'all put in the field. We welcome our 2 new ones here. You moved to a great state where you see we've got good support with biologically science-based management, and that's what we've seen a lot of that.
Just under additional topics, Brandon, we got an update on the deer study and when we'll have kind of a presentation of the findings and how much longer before that kind of wraps up.
Yeah,
et cetera.
April will speak to that.
Is the end of the year is when we expect everything to be finalized. And multiple students will be presenting in the next month at the Southeast Deer Study Group. But they finished up their last season field works. They are still in the analysis stage of everything. They still have deer out that they'll be tracking, and I think the collar drop off dates around April. So after that,
Sometime in the later part of this year, they'll come to one of the meetings and.
That is certainly a possibility. The final contractual date for having final reports and stuff done is December. But probably by this summer, in terms of the really wow factor, the interesting stuff, those numbers will be kind of like what Colleen presented, pretty close to whatever the final number is going to be. If y'all would want to entertain that as a topic for one of these meetings, we can certainly go ahead and put that on the radar.
I would get that on.
As April said, 3 of the students working on the project are presenting at the Southeast Deer Study Group here in a couple months or in a month, yes. And so we can certainly get that on the agenda for.
Where will that be?
That's where y'all going.
we're going up to Maryland, and it's start actually 16th or 9th. That Deer Study Group meeting. And there are a few as well presenting at North Carolina chapter of Wildlife Society posters.
So they're starting to get all their stuff together and get it out there. And that's kind of the presentation that would be good. They're going to keep digging into data on different statistical analysis and stuff, but we put that.
Just let us know when you get which meeting date, as much notice as possible when you think that they'll come actually.
Well, the other challenge is
We could probably put them up there to talk for 6 hours, but I don't think y'all want quite that much. So it'll be kind of focusing it down on the most relevant, pieces of result. And probably, would it be on a Wednesday committee meeting versus set of, it'd be.
Oh, yeah, we
Yeah.
do it on big game committee day.
Yeah, so, and I don't want somebody to wait, I don't know who this would go to, Brad. I don't want somebody to waste a lot of time, but I've gotten more phone calls in the last, 6, 8 months about drones and cameras, states that are outlawing during season, out of season, I think that would be good information for us to know. But and I talked to you, Brad, about a couple. I mean, I had crazy phone calls, folks that are accusing their neighbors of using their drone to move their deer from their property to their neighbor's property, and scouting deer with drones and all kind of conspiracy theories and whatnot. But, and they were, of course, they're telling me Ohio, they've made it illegal. I don't know if that's true or not true, so
We had conversations again at the South, different states are struggling. They got, some states is like, you can go find your dead deer, but if the deer's not dead, you can't use a drone to go find it. And I can let the officers there sort of, right now, you can't actively hunt with a drone. I mean, there's not a huge bright, there's not.
Right.
Until we create laws specifically for that, we apply common sense. If it's not immediately before, during, or after the take, and it's not part of that hunt. And obviously there's some gray areas in there as well. But right now, if somebody asks us if they can discover deer and things like that, but if they're out there physically hunting, there's already federal law and other statute that prohibits.
Yeah,
There's a federal law.
Yeah, I mean,
There's a federal law.
they were asking me about thermal drones, using thermal and this, that. I mean, so again, I'm more curious what some other states may be doing or not doing. You and I talked about this one.
I'll work with being against that. We'll put together a little bit of a summary of.
Just,
what we
like I said, I
know.
don't want somebody to waste a lot of time, but I think that would be pretty interesting for us to know kind of just where this thing is going, because drones are getting more and more and more popular, obviously, and people are using them for every advantage they can get and whatnot. So,
It's becoming a big business, some spots, or at least a business. We do have some folks in the state who are providing drone tracking service.
right, yeah, somebody brought that up, actually, was it legal or not legal to hire somebody to, come retrieve deer with a drone, and again, thermal and, so we're gonna have to deal with it at some point in time, and to know.
Well, we've actually had, with our game land staff, we've already been having conversations and discussions. You can't launch a drone from our game lands, but you can fly over it as long as you have a place that you can launch it from. And so it's all kind of quirky things out there.
Yeah.
That's like shooting from the roadside.
Any other questions? Thank y'all, good information, and, see you. We'll be adjourned.
We're adjourned at 1:30. I guess we're getting rugged.
Everybody to the Finance Audit and Compliance Committee meeting. This meeting is being streamed live and recorded as a public record. A recording of the meeting will be available at www.ncwildlife.org. And would call on Margo Minkler for the roll call.
Good afternoon. I'm going to do a roll call for our Finance, Audit, and Compliance Committee members. Committee Chair Lena Zimmer.
Here.
Committee Vice Chair Brad Stanback. David Hoyle.
Here.
John Coley.
Here.
Jim Ruffin.
Here.
Mike Alford.
Here.
And ex officio members Lonnie Crump.
Here.
Mark Craig.
Here.
Mr. Chairman, you have a forum.
Thank you, Ms. Miller. Thanks everyone for joining here. I want to first call on Internal Auditor Director Elizabeth Davis.
Thank you, Committee Chair Zimmer, and good afternoon, Commissioners. We'll go ahead and jump right in. Just to kind of give you an overview of what we're going to be talking about today, I'll go over the internal audit strategic plan. The draft strategic plan was shared with you ahead of this committee meeting, but we'll talk about it in detail. I'll give an engagement update and an administrative update as well. So before we get started and dive in too much, I just kind of want to give a general reminder that the internal audit functions for state agency for North Carolina are required by general statute to abide by the Institute of Internal Audit Standards, the standards. So I'm going to talk about those a lot today. The standards were recently updated, which requires that internal audit functions draft a strategic plan. So that's one of the reasons why the strategic plan was created for the internal audit function. Some of the other reasons are strategic plans are just a really good way to focus your resources. It's a really good way to make sure you're achieving your mission. So with that, that's why the strategic plan was created. So to kind of give you an overview of how it was created. It was created after the completion of a strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, or a SWOT analysis, which was included in that draft that was provided to everyone, as well as with consideration of the agency's current strategic plan as well. So just to kind of give an overview of what the strategic planning entails, it's a 5-year long strategic plan. It's not set in stone, so it can be updated and changed as needed to align with the agency's goals, and it will be routinely evaluated. The plan was discussed with the current and former executive directors. It does have 4 goals. Each goal has 3 objectives. Each objectives has strategies and metrics for how those objectives and goals will be achieved. I'm not going to jump into that. I'm going to give you a high-level overview of the goals. It's being presented today essentially for feedback. If there's any questions or concerns, I just want to make sure the committee and internal audit are on the same page with where the internal audit function is headed. So with that, I'm just going to walk through the goals. So goal 1 is to enhance the effectiveness of the engagement process. So the primary thought here is that we really want to make sure the internal audit process is a value add activity and beneficial for the client. It's really meant to be a helpful process. And so that's essentially what internal audit is supposed to do. So we want to make sure that's one of our primary goals. Goal 2 is to promote internal audit services and establish trust as a key partner. Internal audit really wants to be seen as a resource and a partner. Our stakeholder is the agency and all the people within the agency that make it function. I really want to ensure the internal audit function is intentional with meeting stakeholders and building those relationships. It just helps us be able to better serve our stakeholders. Goal 3 is to develop and implement a comprehensive quality assurance and improvement program to make sure we're achieving compliance. So just to kind of give you an understanding of what that means, internal audit is audited every 5 years. That's one of those standard requirements. The last time the internal audit function was audited here was in 2021. And unfortunately, we did not receive a conformance rating to the standards. We definitely want to make sure we are conforming to the standards. Just to make sure we're delivering value-added services, but also to make sure we're in compliance with those requirements that we're required to follow by general statute. It's also just important that we continuously reassess to make sure we are maintaining compliance with standards. Goal 4 is to develop and implement a comprehensive fraud management process. The goal here is to really create a process to ensure agency resources are protective and to give staff an avenue to report concerns. So no one likes fraud, and while it is generally rare, it does happen. So we just want to make sure we have resources available to address those concerns. Are there any questions or concerns with the strategic plan? All right. So just to kind of give you an idea, this will be finalized after this committee meeting. There will at minimum be an annual update on where we're at with the strategic plan accomplishment. Some of the metrics that are in the strategic plan will be reported out more frequently as key performance indicator monitoring, which I'll discuss more in the administrative update. I'll go ahead and jump into the engagement update. What you're seeing here on the screen are all engagements internal audit is working on or have completed this year or is planning on working on this year. Majority of these engagements were on the audit plan that was approved in October, with the exception of 2 items, which is the FY25 risk assessment, which is a continuation from last year's audit plan, And it essentially just can't be closed out until it's presented to the committee, so it will be presented today and we'll close it out today. The other item is a procurement consult, which was added at management's request. So just to kind of give you a high level overview of what these engagements are, just so you can better understand the slide, I'll kind of talk first about our audits. So audits are engagements where internal audit determines the objectives and scope of the engagement based on risk. So we have 2 of those for this year, and that includes the Brant operational review. So it has a preliminary objective to review the NC Go Outdoors adherence to contract terms, verify accuracy of agency revenue, and to assess customer satisfaction. The other audit for this year on the audit plan was the Go Gas card review. For those unfamiliar with Go Gas, the Go Gas card is an agency issued card that is used to fuel agency owned vehicles and equipment. It differs from the motor fleet card, and it's not used for motor fleet vehicles. So motor fleet vehicles are those that we rent from the Department of Administration. And it's different from the P card, as you're only allowed to, you're only permitted to purchase fuel with it, and some minor maintenance items at times. To kind of talk through our next few engagements, the next engagements are consults. So consultations differ from audits, as in consultations, the objective and the scope is kind of more management led. So these are items that management requested be reviewed, and they have more of a say in the objective and scope of the engagement. So we have 4 noted here. The first one being the subrecipient monitoring consult. This was a review internal audit completed that evaluated and advised on processes for the subrecipient risk assessment and monitoring process, specifically for federal grants. That engagement has been completed. We'll talk a little bit more in detail about that engagement today. One of the other consults noted is the dispatch consult, and its preliminary objective is to evaluate data management and record retention for law enforcement dispatch to ensure compliance with requirements and best practices. The other one listed here, and it might sound familiar, is the EAGLE consult. EAGLE stands for the Enhanced Accountability in Government Through Leadership and Education. What it is it's an internal controls assessment where we're required to do by the Office of State Controllers, the North Carolina State Controller's Office. Internal audit's going to play a very minor role, if at all, this year with that process, and it'll be to just basically test controls finance identifies. The last engagement noted is the procurement consult. This was an added engagement with the preliminary objective to review the procurement processes for efficiency and effectiveness, and that's specifically as it pertains to e-procurement. Our next kind of group of engagements are follow-up. So we have 2 follow-up engagements. The objectives for both of these is pretty much the same. It's essentially to reassess risk identified in prior reviews to ensure risks have been mitigated. There's a specific slide that talks about follow-ups, but just to kind of let you know, so for this slide, we have a purchase card follow-up. So this was, so a few years ago, there was a P card investigation that was completed by the Office of State Budget Management, and we had a couple of observations associated with that engagement. And then there was a civil rights review that the Department of Homeland Security conducted. And the agency has already implemented processes to address those recommendations, and this is kind of like a double check to make sure what was implemented follows requirements, essentially. The last kind of engagement bucket is risk assessment. So this is the agency-wide review of risk that helps develop the annual audit plan. So you'll see the FY25 risk assessment and the that helped develop this current year's audit plan, and the FY26 risk assessment, which will help in the development of next year's audit plan. So now that you kind of know what we're talking about, I'm going to kind of give you an idea of what these charts mean. Starting with the project status chart, we'll just kind of start over here with the not started phase and go around. So not started is simply exactly what it sounds. It's just not been started. So there are 4 engagements that fall in that bucket, and that includes the civil rights follow-up, EAGLE, the dispatch consult, and the FY26 risk assessment. Moving on down to the planning bucket. The planning phase is the process to assess the risk of the topic to determine the final engagement, objective scope, audit steps, and budgets. So the preliminary objectives I just gave you are just that. They're preliminary. They're high-level overview of what the engagement is going to be about. When we do planning, we kind of narrow that down to more specific things. A good example of this is for the GO-GAS review. The preliminary objective was to assess processes for efficiency and effectiveness. There's actually 7 final objectives associated with that review. So 7 different processes that is being reviewed that span over multiple divisions. So that's just to kind of give you an idea of what the planning process is. Field work is where most people, when you think of audit, you think of field work. This is where we're kind of more in your business. So we're learning more about your processes. We're walking through your processes. This is when we request documentation from you and test to make sure what you've described to us is being effectively completed, for example. So it's noted here that we have 2 engagements in the fieldwork process. Those are both technically GO-GAS reviews. So for the majority of this page, you'll see GO-GAS review is not considered an audit. It's noted as a review. It's because that's technically 2 reviews that for at this time is being grouped. Essentially what happens when that happens is basically there's an objective that was identified as part of the fieldwork process that was not a part of the original engagement scope. So an additional engagement was created to be able to effectively address the process identified or the item identified. Reporting is when we assess everything that was identified throughout the engagement to determine the best way to present those results to management. So the only engagement we have listed there is the FY25 risk assessment. And again, that's because it needs to be presented to this committee before I can close it out. Complete is just when everything associated with the engagement has been completed, and that pertains to the subrecipient consultation. So kind of moving on to budget versus actual hours here, just to kind of give you an overview of how these budget hours are created. So for engagements where planning has not been completed, so those in the not started phase and in the planning phase, the budget hours noted on this chart are the preliminary hours assigned to that engagement. So the preliminary hours are truly a best estimate for how long it will take to do an engagement. It's based off of prior year's work. It's based off of understanding of processes, resource availability, etc. So just to kind of let you know, the budget hours were created with the idea that there would be another internal auditor that would have started October 1st. That has not been the case, and I'll kind of talk more about staff resources during the administrative update. So we'll talk more about it, don't worry. But once we kind of finalize engagement objectives in the planning phase, we'll reevaluate this budget, the preliminary budget, to see, does it make sense? Will we be able to address what we need to address within those budget hours? If not, we kind of have to identify where those hours are going to come from based on the audit plan. So for example, the procurement consult was an added review, and the way those budget hours were preliminary grabbed from the audit plan was from unassigned engagement hours. So for some of these budget hours, it does seem like a lot, specifically for the Brant operational audit and the GO-GAS reviews. But just to kind of, those are the biggest engagements that audit will be addressing this year. So those budget hours are just generally more. So just so you're aware. The final item here is the estimated timelines for completion. So you'll see that essentially we're not going to be able to complete everything by the end of the fiscal year. But hopefully we'll be able to start most everything. The one green item is just that additional consult that was added. Are there any questions on engagement status? I will talk more. Committee Chair Zimmer did ask me to talk about staffing and resources, and I will talk about that in much more detail during the administrative update. But are there any questions about engagements? So moving on to the FY25 risk assessment, this is just kind of the process for the risk assessment. It's an annual process that's completed every year that it essentially assess agency-wide risks. So We kind of start this out with an external review where we look at things that that happen externally to the agency that could affect our ability to meet goals. So that could be federal statute changes, other state agency changes, that kind of thing. We do also complete internal review. So this will be, we look at prior risk assessments, risks, reports issued this year, agency strategic plans, et cetera. The biggest piece of the risk assessment is actually risk discussion. So this past year I met with all division heads and kind of talk through their concerns for risk, anything that keeps them up at night, any concerns they may have for their processes, what their resource constraints were, what the compliance requirements were, any fraud concerns they have, and how these items affect their overall goals. Everyone was also given the opportunity to specifically say what they wanted us to consider looking at, or any other specific areas of concern they may have. We had these same conversations with the director's office as well. So we also do a data analytics review so we did a financial comparison over the last couple of fiscal years, as well as a staff turnover analysis this past year. And we may expand that this next year to include some further analysis. After all of this is conducted, we essentially evaluate everything we've learned and conduct a risk analysis. So that analysis considered items that come up that directly affect agency goals. So anything fraudulent in nature, anything that would be detrimental to agency finances, have a significant reputational risk, or anything just in general that would impede us from meeting the agency's mission. These items were assessed with consideration of items requested by management, how many divisions were affected by the risk, and how many times the concern was brought up. Consideration is also given to control. So just because something's a risk, if we're effectively controlling it, managing it, doesn't necessarily mean it has a higher risk or something that needs to be evaluated. We also kind of consider, would an engagement in this area at this time add value or not? And I'll kind of talk more about that in just a minute. Then we kind of assess our resource availability, so our staffing availability, our knowledge and skills to assess high risk. If we don't have the knowledge or skills, do we need to hire a contractor? Do we have the budget to hire a contractor? Those kinds of things. What kind of budget we have available to us for training. It's a whole bunch of different things we assess. Then we obtain audit plan approval. So the plans were discussed with Cam and Kyle and Landon with the executive directors, both prior and current, and the committee chair, to ensure areas of concern were being covered and to include any additional items that they may have wanted to be included. Any questions? Well, and then we finalized the plan, which was when it was formally presented to the commission meeting in October, as well as when the executive director signed it. We do monitor the plan throughout the year, reassess if the audit plan is still addressing the top agency risks and where we are at with audit plan completion. Any questions about the risk assessment process? Kind of moving on to the results. So before we kind of jump into the specific here, just to kind of give you an idea, there were 140 risks noted that were combined into 57 items or topics. So when I say 140 risks, I just kind of want to give an idea of what that means. For example, employee safety was brought up by every single person I had a risk discussion with. So, that's like 20 times employee safety was brought up. So it was 20 times it was a risk. 57 items may also seem like a lot, but when we think about that, consideration should just be given to how varied the agency activities are. However, a lot of thought was given how to best analyze the risk topics. And I do think there is argument that I could have grouped the items into fewer topics. So that's something we may critique this year. The risk scores were also pretty conservative. So what I mean by that is I was very hesitant to score something low risk without having a lot of knowledge on the topics. So as my knowledge of the agency grows, the risk scores may be evaluated differently as well. But I was pretty conservative saying something was low just out of an abundance of caution. So kind of talk through the high risk items. The highest risk items were noted to be employee relations, procurement cards, Brant Go Outdoors, and employee recruitment. So you'll recall on the audit plan, procurement cards are listed as two separate engagements, one being the Go Gas card and one being the P card follow-up. And Brant was also included on the audit plan as an engagement. HR processes, including employee relations and employee recruitment, was not on the audit plan. And so when I discussed earlier in that process, we kind of evaluate, would it add value? It was essentially deemed that at that time, or within this fiscal year, it wouldn't add value, given that the new HR director was in the process of already changing processes and implementing changes. So you kind of don't want the audit process to hinder you from being able to do what you want to do. And you also don't want too many cooks in the kitchen, so to speak, at the same time. So kind of what's been done to assess that and continue to evaluate that risk is the HR director and I do meet quarterly to kind of talk about processes, where we're at with things, and so that kind of thing. Either way, all of the risks will be evaluated as part of the FY26 risk assessment, and hopefully we'll see some of these items go down too. Are there any questions about the risk assessment process?
I'll just comment here. I was gonna say, so you showed me this earlier, and I was telling Elizabeth, listen, it is what it is. Better to know, your risk than not. And as she mentioned, being very conservative early on as we move on, hopefully these will drop, but it gives you kind of a good internal look at what needs to be, addressed and whatnot. But it's a good first analysis, I think, something we haven't really had in the past. So.
Yeah, and I started in May, so the risk assessment, it was with 3 months knowledge of the agency. So just kind of keeping that in mind, too. So kind of moving on, the subrecipient consult. So this was in a completed engagement. It was completed at the request of Kate Pipkin. She recently retired, but you probably are aware she was over a lot of our grant processes for the agency. So the objective of it was to really assess the subrecipient risk assessment and monitoring process, and those were for federal related grants. The report was issued in November. There were 2 observations identified, and just to kind of talk about what an observation is, it's when a risk or an opportunity for improvement has been identified, and a recommendation is made on how to alleviate the risk or address improve, or basically recommend improvement to processes. Most things, when you look at it, especially in an internal audit review, you kind of take a deep dive. So pretty much any process you look at is always going to have an opportunity for an improvement. So observations aren't necessarily really concerning. It's when the observations are not addressed that's more of a concern. So the 2 observations were made for the subrecipient risk assessment process. And essentially the observation was to be more consistent with making sure the risk assessment was documented and making sure our assessment was more robust to be able to effectively evaluate subrecipients. So there were recommendations made on how to do that, as well as how to improve processes to make them more effective and efficient. For the subrecipient monitoring process, we had a very robust programmatic subrecipient monitoring process. We were actually given kudos by the Office of Inspector General auditors on that process. What we kind of were missing was that financial subrecipient monitoring piece. So the recommendation, so that was kind of where this lack of comprehensive subrecipient monitoring, that's really speaking to the financial piece and just making sure our financial monitoring process aligned with best practices. So recommendations were made on how to expand our monitoring practices and how to make sure we were ensuring we were aligning with federal requirements. So management did provide a corrective action plan for observations, with that plan being due January 2026. So internal audit will follow up on these observations to make sure the corrective actions were implemented or and the risk was mitigated. Any questions about the subrecipient monitoring consult? kind of go through our audit observation status. This next slide just kind of gives you an overview of where all observations made for the agency is pretty much at. So the P card review it's already partially been addressed and it's continued to be worked on by finance and procurement. The same with that civil rights evaluation. Like I said, they've already implemented a process. Internal audit hasn't evaluated that process to be able to say it's closed out. And then as previously mentioned, those are the subrecipient monitoring observations. Any questions on observations? Moving on to the administrative update, I'll kind of just talk through these charts and then we'll talk more about resources and staffing as requested. So just to talk about hours by activity, this is where my time has been spent this year. You'll see that administrative time seems pretty high. It's essentially high for a couple of different reasons. I am in the process of hiring an internal auditor one. That position is a new position for the agency. So there's a lot of work that puts into creating a new position and then hiring the new position. Also, I've taken quite a bit of training this year. And that training is really associated with systems. So in order for me to get access to systems, I have to complete training. In order for me to evaluate the data coming out of the systems, I have to complete training as well. So that's a lot of what that time is. The other time you'll kind of see here that it looks not to be matching what was on the audit plan is technical assistance. I provided quite a bit of technical assistance with the Office of Inspector General audit this year, and I'll kind of talk more about that in detail. It was just not really planned to provide that much technical assistance, and kind of to give you an idea of what technical assistance means. That means when you call internal audit and be like, I want to do X, Y, and Z, do you feel like there's a segregation of duties issue? And I'm like, nah, sounds good, or consider this. So it's something that doesn't arise to a level of an engagement. But we do offer advice on it, if that makes sense. So kind of talking through the budget versus actual. So as previously noted, a significant discrepancy is because the original budget included having additional staff auditor by October 1st. The training amount was unexpected. Budget hours are I'm sorry. If you kind of look through here, our primary concern are engagements. Where are we at with our engagement? How are we addressing engagements? Because that's how we're addressing agency risk. So if you'll look here in the middle, the engagement budget hours remaining are the budget hours for engagements that haven't been filled yet. If you look kind of to the right, you'll see where my time availability is remaining for the year. If you look to the left, you'll see where the remaining staff availability is for the year. So if I hire somebody by March and my staff, that's what those hours are looking at. So just to kind of give you an idea of what that means, it means that we're likely not going to complete the audit plan this year. So what kind of happens? I have a few options for not completing the audit plan. Basically, I can come back to this committee and request for items to be removed from the audit plan, especially anything that hasn't been started. I can request that those items be transferred to next year's audit plan. That's kind of what my options are. What my plan is to moving forward is to just continue with the current audit plan, reassess the items that we're unable to address this year as part of next year's risk assessment, and evaluate if they should continue on to next year's audit plan, if that makes sense. So in kind of evaluation of this and just kind of assessing how some of this ended up shaking out this year. As mentioned, I did meet with Committee Chair Zimmer prior to this meeting, was asked about resources, specifically staffing, out of the concern for being unable to meet those, to be able to complete those engagements. I do sincerely appreciate that question, and I'll kind of talk more about what our resources are. So just to kind of give you an idea, the Council of Internal Audit, which oversees internal audit functions for the state, did complete a staffing analysis of all internal audit shops for the entire state and any state agency or public school, university, and presented a report in October of 2023 with that analysis. So WRC was noted at that time to need two additional positions given the size of the agency. So that's a total of 3 positions. I don't disagree with that assessment. I do think we have a pretty large agency. But I also think you could probably point at any state agency program and they'll say they need staff too. So this report was part of staffing discussions I had with the current and prior executive directors, and I was given a brand new position. So just to kind of make it pretty clear, I've been highly supported with resources from leadership since starting here. In many ways, not just with the new position. I routinely meet with leadership about where the internal audit function is at, where we need to go with being able to make sure it's successful. And I do think there will be a recognizable benefit of the internal audit function. I do think staffing needs to continue to be a discussion item. I think the best step forward in evaluating staffing is to kind of see what we're able to complete this year, what the risk assessment looks like this next year, and our ability to address the high-risk items, as well as continuing to monitor our key performance indicators and see where we're falling short and what exactly we can do to address those items. So I do hope staffing and resources in general is a continued discussion that this committee is open to having, and I do sincerely appreciate the question about staffing as well as the resources I have been provided. Are there any questions about this slide? So just to kind of give an update on where we're at addressing action plan items that are outstanding for internal audit. So internal audit is also audited and we are audited frequently. So there was quite a few things we had action items outstanding for before I started this position. So we're working through addressing some of those. So, that included that quality assurance review I mentioned previously. Council of Internal Audit conducted a review of our risk assessment process for the fiscal year 23 risk assessment. I also completed the self-assessment maturity model last year and presented it. So all of those things have action items that come out of them. So we had observations that we had corrective actions for, is essentially what this is showing. And this is showing where we're at. So we're 90% of the way there. Some of these things, engagements just have been prioritized over addressing. Some of these things I can't really address until we do our quality assurance internal review this year or hire another staff member. I do want to note, Council of Internal Audit just recently, as of last Friday, completed a review of our engagement process, and we had no observations related to that. So that's great news. There were 2 minor recommendations to update procedures to essentially include record retention requirements and to make sure we include agency general counsel on reviewing our reports before they're reported out on. So Tamara and I have actually already talked about that. It's just not in my procedures. But all corrective actions either way will be addressed by the end of the fiscal year. But are there any questions about anything on this slide? All right. I promise I'm almost done. So just to kind of the one last thing, what you'll see here is an excerpt from the internal audit charter. Essentially, I have a responsibility to this committee to disclose any impairment of independence or objectivity in fact or appearance. So essentially, I'm making a disclosure. I completed quite a bit of, or I assisted with addressing an observation during the federal grant review earlier this year, specifically as it pertains to mileage rate calculations. I think we did a really good job of trying to make sure my independence wasn't impaired. However, in the abundance of precaution, it may appear like it's impaired. So with that being said, I won't have the ability to do an audit or a consult on the mileage rate calculation for at least a year. At the end of that year, it'll be reevaluated if there still appears to be an impairment of independence of objectivity or independence. And then if there still is that appearance, we'll continue to discuss safeguards around that impairment. Otherwise, I'll no longer consider to have an impairment. So we'll reassess that in December of 2025. So I know that was a lot. I appreciate it. Are there any questions?
Any questions? No. No. No, thank you. That's very informative and necessary. So thank you for that. All right. Next, call on Chief Financial Officer Jason Cottle to discuss finances.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, everyone. We'll begin as we always do by looking at a year-over-year comparison of the activity in both our general fund and capital improvement funds. There's always a lot of data on this slide, and we really only highlight maybe a half a dozen or so items. So I've incorporated some new slides following this to kind of break out each of those pieces and maybe add a little bit of clarity and context. I do realize we're encroaching on committee of the whole's time, so I'm going to blast through this quickly. Fees, licenses, and fines on our general fund revenues, we saw an increase of 9%. And again, I'll highlight the reasons for these increases in the upcoming slides. Our appropriations, we saw a decline from the prior year by about 18%. Personal services, think salaries, we saw an increase of 7%. Capital outlay predominantly was heavy equipment. We saw increase by 30% over the prior year. And the last item in our general fund category where we saw a change of greater than $1 million over the prior year was in our grants, state aids, and subsidies, and we saw a decline there of 43%. In our capital improvement fund, we saw our transfers increase substantially by about $4 million. And the other thing that we saw that changed drastically from the prior year was, again, capital outlay. And as I said, I'll give some clarity and context on each of those. So we saw our fees, licenses, and fines increase about 9% from the prior year. We think there's three substantial factors there. One, the CPI increase that we implemented July 1. The second is the ability of our clients to auto renew in the new Go Outdoor system. And the third, just a simplified purchasing process, also a result of that new system implementation. We don't know how much of a contributing factor any one of those three may be on its own. But I think those combined explain that 9% year-over-year increase. Again, I said we saw appropriations decrease by about 18%. That's alarming at first, but when we add some context, it kind of dwindles that down. $3.5 million was received by the Youth Outdoor Engagements Commission for one-time funding in fiscal 24. That appropriation funding source has been replaced by revenues from sports wagering. So that we saw a decrease by 3.5. WRC saw a slight increase from the prior year as a result of the 16 new law enforcement positions that we got during the last long session. So the net effect of those two combined was a just shy of $2 million decrease in appropriations overall. On the expenditures category in our general fund, personal services against salaries, we saw increase about 7% from the prior year. We know that the General Assembly awarded a 3% legislative increase last year for all state employees. Additionally, sworn law enforcement officers got 3% on top of that. So that explains the largest of that increase in personal services. Expenditures in the general fund, again, we saw capital outlay increase by about 30%. Most of that was heavy and ag equipment to be used maintaining our game lands. And again, on the general fund expenditures, we saw grants, aid, and subsidies decrease this year by about 43%. Again, that is a little bit misleading because a large portion of that decrease was not WRC. That was the Youth Outdoor Engagement Commission, and a decrease in the grants that they've been awarding to the schools and school districts they partner with. In our capital improvement category, again, we saw our transfers in section of our revenues increase substantially in 2025, and that's largely attributed to the endowment funds that we've been transferring into the San Marcan construction project. Expenditures on our capital improvement fund, we saw increase capital outlay about 24% from the prior year, and that appears to be land parcels that we've purchased in this current year. Moving on to our endowment fund, if there's no questions of what I've just presented.
Yeah, I got a couple.
Yes, sir.
How the sports betting is distributed. You went over that pretty quick. And what is that percentage that we get And how does that
It doesn't
trickle
go to
down?
us.
It's not us.
It runs through wildlife commission.
Come again?
Just go ahead.
I was gonna say, we help the Youth Outdoor Engagement Commission administratively, but that's not a funding source that we benefit from or that we put into any program.
But it's hit a lot of different categories, but I'll take it with you later.
Yes, sir. All right, moving on to our endowment fund. As of December 31st, we had a total balance in the fund of $203,975,837.04. Asset allocation is again hovering around 85-15, with 84.45% being represented in our equities holding of just over 172 million, and the remaining 15.55% in our short-term investment fund, about 31.7 million. Our expendable income earned to date is just shy of 72 million. And as I've done at the past few meetings, I wanted to show of that what's already obligated for construction, renovation, and other agency initiatives. So we're still hovering around 38 million of expendable endowment income to be utilized. Are there any questions about the endowment fund or anything else I presented today? Yes, sir.
Any of that go for Helene recovery?
At this point, nothing has been earmarked for Helene recovery. What we have spent, we're submitting for reimbursement via FEMA, but it's there as a source should we need to tap into it. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
When transfers are made for projects like San Juan,
Mhm.
does that come from the short-term or equity portion or?
So in the past, it would have been a mixture of both. Right now, we're taking that out of the short term. We've managed to secure enough in that short-term holding to cover our known obligations so that we're not having to close any equity positions or draw down any of those investments.
And as you know, I'm glad we got out of the long-term bond portfolio and short-term. We're getting income from that. It's a reasonable rate. We've benefited greatly by having such a large amount in equities. We could have benefited more if we'd been more aggressive at shifting into equities, but with the turbulence in the world now, I'm less comfortable with that much in equities.
Okay.
Want to consider taking that down a little bit, maybe 80-20. That's a discussion we could start now and
What would we go into? Back in the bonds?
not into bonds, but have a little more in short term. Knowing we've got these commitments coming up and a severe market downturn could eliminate our ability to cover some of that. And
Is there enough already short term to cover all of our?
For what we know at this time, yes, there is. So unless there were any major additions to those projects, I think we're okay for the.
You know something we don't know?
just, normally I'm very comfortable being mostly in equities as we are under current political situation. I'm less comfortable than I used to be. And I think that's a discussion, I'll start thinking about it.
We have upcoming expenses that will be. Like it's a Setzer and Samarkand and Setzer were the last two, right? Samarkand.
Yeah, and I think Setzer indefinitely is on hold as we focus on Armstrong. Samarkand, I believe that we've already transferred everything that was obligated. So no, I don't think there's anything else hanging out there at the moment.
So maybe I guess as we go forward, maybe, or go ahead.
The 5.6 million debt service, what was that debt?
That is for a bond repayment that several years ago, I think 2011 was used to acquire several hundred acres of game lands.
How much longer?
Yes, about.
I think it runs through 28.
Twice, 3 times. 28 or 29.
And we did recently inquire about going ahead and absolving that debt in one lump sum, but they weren't amenable to that suggestion. Yes, sir.
We afford any big ticket items that are not, accounted for, we can discuss about putting maybe setting aside some for short term. So that's
Any other questions?
Questions? Yes, sir.
Thank you very much.
And that concludes the finance committee.
Good job, Lanny.
Thank you. You didn't show my hours on those.
Meeting of committee of the whole order. Meeting is being streamed live and recorded on record. Recording of the meeting will be available at www.ncwildlife.org. At this time, I recognize Margaret Miller for a roll call.
Do a roll call for our committee of the whole members. Committee Chair Monty Crump,
Here.
Committee Vice Chair Mark Craig,
Here.
David Boyle, John Foley,
Here.
Wes Segers,
Here.
Tommy Fumble, Tom Barry,
Here.
Brad Standback, Jim Ruffin,
Here.
Ray Clifton, Kelly Davis, here, Steve Wyndham,
Here.
Landon Zimmer,
Here.
John Stone,
Here.
Hayden Rogers, John Alexander,
Here.
Tom Hazlett,
Here.
J.C. Cole, Mike Alford, Joe Bud,
Here.
Reed Smith. Mr. Chairman. you have it.
Thank you. At this time, I recognize Brad Howard. By miscellaneous group proposal 2627. Brad.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We've just got a couple of quick rule proposals. One relative to squirrels and one relative to listed species. As you heard Darren mention earlier this morning, we're with the adjustment and change in our turkey season. We need to adjust the spring gray squirrel season. Just moving it forward a week so that we don't have turkey season and squirrel season overlapping. That was always a concern with the spring squirrel season. So this will move just to shift it. There's no biological impact here. Just shift the squirrel season back 1 week so it won't occur the last week of turkey season. As you also heard Darren talk about earlier this morning, they're making some shifts in the game lands rules that have to do with camping and some of those things. That's one of the reasons that the squirrel season wasn't on game lands when we originally initiated this season. We're having to shift those rules anyway now, so we're recommending as well that we extend expand the season to the game lands as well. We've had numerous requests for this over the last couple of years to allow for the opportunity. One of the good things about moving the season now, it'll carry it over Memorial Day weekend, so it'll be a nice youth opportunity as well, especially in the game lands out west. Question about those? This one's a little bit different and a unique rule. This rule is going to establish definitions for periods of time considered biologically significant for reproduction and dispersal of certain wildlife species. This rule will encompass and include both wildlife and fisheries, aquatic diversity, terrestrial diversity, all. And the reason we need to do this is that our staff, especially Shannon's staff and HabCon, routinely provide comments on numerous NCDEQ permits for projects specifically. And so legislative change, try to explain this. A legislative change last year requires that any comments that are listed on a permit, for example, we routinely, when we're talking about beach renourishment and those kind of things, we provide a comment that says, do not do it during this time, during the sea turtle nesting and hatching periods. Do it outside of this window. Now they have to have any comment placed on a permit. The EQ has to have a reference in statute or rule for that time period. So we're going to create a rule that just basically establishes the special time periods. And we've got some examples as well with trout streams and work in and around trout streams and some other things. So this rule will just be a rule that establishes this is the sea turtle nesting and hatching period. This is the what do you call it, Christian? Moratorium on for trout streams. That's what this rule will be. So then they can reference this rule and put it on the permits. It's really just going to be a rule that doesn't regulate anything. It just states when the time periods are. That's all I've got.
I can't believe it.
Don't give
You don't have committee questions. Yeah, there you go.
You won't talk about turkeys or, I mean,
I just can't wait for turkey season to get over every year, so I go squirrel.
Expect the box squirrels. This is gray squirrel only.
Right, it's still sensitive.
I hate scratching.
Sure, that value, jump shit value.
Betsy Haywood.
Didn't bring my step stool today to stand by Mallory, but but today we only have one thing to present, and that is consideration of final adoption of the permanent rule for White Lake and Bladen County. And you all may recall that the open comment period for this rule closed right before the December meeting. And so because we knew that you all did not have an opportunity to review all the comments, we put it off until this time. And you have your comments before you. I will just point out that as you look at the data, you'll see that 44% of the respondents were in support of the rule at White Lake. 37% were not in support of this permanent rule at White Lake. And there was a no preference of 17%, but that's somewhat of an outlier because the way this internet system works is it accepts comments that are sometimes not even related to water safety rulemaking. So I'm sure you all have seen some of those during this time. So there were a total of 59 comments received. First of all, are there any questions or discussion about that you'd like to do before I move on?
Any questions, anybody?
Okay. All right, so tomorrow staff will recommend final adoption of the permanent rule for White Lake that will create within the restricted area, that is the area between the buoys and the shoreline, a no wake zone wherein motorboats must travel at no wake speed only perpendicular to the shoreline. Yes, sir.
Between the shoreline and that, in the buoys or whatever else, is it 50 feet, 100 feet? Or
Sometimes it's 500 feet, but I found out later from state parks that sometimes it's 700 feet. And some of you all who are familiar with White Lake know more than I do about that.
Any other questions?
Thank you very much.
Check rare rulemaking adoption. Yes.
All right, I've only got one temporary rule today, and that is KNF 0307 for vessel livery safety requirements on Lake Norman. This originated from some information that staff received late last year about safety concerns and enforcement challenges around vessel liveries on this lake. So to address this, proposed amendments will require vessel liveries to conduct and document safety activities with vessel renters prior to relinquishing control of the vessels. And those specific activities include pre-rental vessel inspections to make sure that all the safety equipment is on board and accessible, providing and reviewing safe operating instructions and navigational rules on the lake, and providing a navigational map of Lake Norman and the US ATON's pamphlet. Codifying these rules and safety requirements will clarify standards for livery companies and facilitate and streamline enforcement activities to improve public safety on the lake. One public hearing was held, and the comments received on this proposal were all from that hearing. As you can see, there was no preference on the proposed rule change. There were quite a few questions that can be clarified whenever we do the outreach for this proposed rule, should you adopt it tomorrow. So tomorrow, staff will be recommending adoption of the temporary amendments at the business meeting. Are there any questions?
Any questions? Okay.
All right, that's it.
Here, yes, this is the end of the agenda. One quick comment before we go to housekeeping. Is obviously the legislature is in session, action keeping posted on what's going on. Several of us have already had conversations with legislators about our agency bill, and our wants, stuff like that at the General Assembly. As usual in the past, if you have any questions or comments about what's going on, please see Mark, me, or Kyle. And then we'll do what we did last time, work through contacts that are with key legislators that were very successful last time, instead of bombarding them with a lot of different viewpoints and different stuff like that. So, and we used about everybody in this room last time. And hopefully it won't go down tomorrow like it did last time. We had very good conversations from now. About a couple of bills they want us to look at that we're not already particularly fond of. As we get closer to it, Ashton provide a rundown of what our agency priorities are, where they're at in the legislature, kind of let the commission follow along what's being proposed and where it's at in the legislature, what committees are going to. If you don't mind doing that and keep them all in the loop. I wish we could do it now, but we don't know. We're still talking legislation about who's gonna sponsor what, what's gonna be in one committee. Is that correct, Ashton? Is there anything you want to add to that?
No, sir. You can discuss that in our meeting this afternoon.
Okay. So is everybody on good graces with that? Hearing none, housekeeping. We have reservations for Second Street Orchard for 6 o'clock. We'll meet live at about 5:30 or before, whenever you want to, but we'd probably need to be heading that way about 5:30 this afternoon. And so how many are planning on going? Go ahead right quick. Yep, good to go. So we'll see everybody at 5:30, go over and have dinner together tonight, meeting adjourned. See you in the morning. Thank you.